I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education for Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. Board members may attend and participate in meetings electronically or in person in accordance with BVSD policy and state law. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez,
Here.
Medler,
Here.
Niznik,
Here.
Quinlan Oweda,
Here.
Rajpal,
Here.
Sargent,
Here.
Unger.
Here.
Thank you.
I'd like to now turn it over to Representative Unger, who is going to read our land acknowledgement this morning.
Sure. Boulder Valley School District resides on and operates on land that is the ancestral homeland and unjustly and illegally taken territory of the Ute, Puebloan, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Apache, Navajo, and 48 other tribal nations historically tied to this land who have called this land home since time immemorial. We acknowledge the atrocities committed here, including the painful history of genocide, forced assimilation, and efforts to alienate the indigenous inhabitants from their homeland supported by the policies of the United States government. BVSD is aware of the many indigenous peoples, past and present, and their dignified nations and cultures who care for the land. Sorry, where was I? With strength and resilience. BVSD recognizes the histories of the land in Colorado and the survival of the many nations that carry their oral traditions into the present. Sorry, someone finish this?
Oh, yes, where are we?
Right here. Sorry, Kitty.
Here?
Yep.
Okay. It is BVSD's responsibility to educate ourselves, our communities, and our students so that we can embrace the wisdom and knowledge of Indigenous peoples and actively stand together to address injustices. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm and honor the history, wisdom, oral traditions, and resilience of Indigenous people and recognize the responsibility to care for and appreciate this land together.
Thank you. I'd like to remind everybody that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Good morning. Thank you for joining us in person and remotely today. We're glad to have you observe and participate in our meetings. At this time, I'd like to see if there's a motion to approve this morning's agenda. Moved by Kitty, seconded by Lelania. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Oweda. Yes. Rajpal,
Yes.
Sargent,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
We'll now begin our one information item for this morning, which is declining enrollment data work session. Dr. Ennis, would you like to do the introductions?
Thank you, Board President Rajpal, members of the board. This is our second morning board work session. For those watching in the public, this is a new format for us this year in BVSD to really take a longer amount of time in a work session format on topics that are really important to the school district at this time. Last month, we talked about some of our data dashboarding and alignment of strategic plan, UIP, strategic plan metrics. And this month, we're going to be talking about declining enrollment and enrollment data. And so our team has been hard at work for the past several months, really honing in on some of the feedback that the board has provided, and then really focusing with our team to create a set of data looks that when we piece these together as a governance team will help us as we think about what to anticipate in terms of enrollment, where we're seeing trends that are outliers, what do the trends look like, and help us as we begin to prepare for the hard work around declining enrollment that I know this board is committed to. We have members of our team here today. Rob Price, Assistant Superintendent of Operations, will be taking the lead. Glenn Segru, our Senior Planner. We have our CFO, Bill Sutter. We have Claire Sims from our Data Accountability Team, and also our LRAC Co-Chair, Jeff Anderson, is here with us today. I want to thank him for joining us as well. This is a complicated topic that not only BVSD is tackling, but others across Colorado and the nation. And the task and the charge that I think that we've provided for our team is we want to be the most transparent, most thorough, most data-driven school district in the state of Colorado as we take on this challenge. So as we engage today, we'll give you a little background knowledge. You'll see some slides that you've seen previously. You'll see a lot of new data looks. And our goal today really is to find what's useful and find at what frequency. Some of the data looks that you'll see are one-time data looks that happen once a year. Some are we've had to really mine data from other sources. Some are sources that we have that we can update real time. And so as we go through, we'll be asking the board to provide feedback. This is a linear presentation as opposed to the last presentation where we had some opportunities to jump around. We really felt like the content today was best served if we went in a linear fashion because we have different data experts depending upon the different data that we'll be presenting. And so Rob's looking at me like I'm taking all the things he was going to say. So I apologize to that, Rob. The good news is the temperature is almost perfect in here. So I appreciate that. And with that, Rob, I'll turn it over to you to take the lead.
Dr. Anderson, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Really what I want to say is over the last year, we've listened. We've spent a lot of time over the last 3 or 4 months going back to previous board meetings to hear what you've had to say, and we've attempted to incorporate your ideas, your thoughts into today's presentation. Now, there are some things, and I'll bring up Board Member Medler's comment the other day about MTSS and how does that relate to declining enrollment. I think those are where some discussions are going to have to be had today. But we have done our best to try to incorporate some of the ideas that have came out of previous work sessions. You'll see the first 19 slides or so is really getting grounded, and you've seen a lot of that. However, we've sprinkled in some new data that you've been asking for. After that, we get into the dashboard look. So that might be a clean break to take a break during this morning's work session. I will ask my team when you're presenting, stop on each slide. We're going to ask for your feedback. Is it helpful if you can give us a thumbs up or no, we don't need to see it again? That's really what we want to look. We're also going to explain where the data comes from. Is it annual? Is it live? Is it something that's monthly? How can we use it? And why is it important as we're working through this? So with that, you've seen this slide before. We just continue to add to this. I'm very proud of the work that we've done up to this point. This work started in 2022. We did a lot of work around board policy from October to January, as you know, right when you were getting onboarded. In February was our first annual enrollment trend report, where we tied the metrics to our enrollment situations at our elementary schools. Today, we are the declining enrollment work session. We've got the showcase on October 9th. Is that right? October 9th? I got that.
5:30 to 8 p.m., Rob.
Thank you. In February, we have another annual enrollment trend. That'll be annual. And then your board prioritization, when Glenn is done with board redistricting, we will jump right into the attendance area review as dictated by the new policy. So we'll have to kind of line that out with some work sessions to talk about that, some ideas. What do we want to accomplish as we're going through that? And then this process continues through Long Range Advisory Committee. We had our meeting last night. This year, we're going to explore the impacts of declining enrollment on the middle level. We will still stay engaged on Heatherwood and the engagement process that is happening there. And then we will continue to study the engagement process as we present at the February annual or the annual enrollment trend report, whatever schools come out of that. LRAC will stay engaged in that process. We will also use LRAC to bounce ideas off on the attendance areas, et cetera, before we bring those back to the board. So as Dr. Anderson mentioned, this isn't unique to BVSD. 12 of the 15 school districts that are shown on this chart are going through the same thing. You'll see that the 3 school districts that are not in a declining enrollment situation, I guess I would ask, what's unique to those school districts? And really, when you look at it, there's more housing opportunities up there, right? I mean, more affordable housing, if you want to call it affordable, still high, but a lot more housing options that we currently don't have available in Boulder Valley School District. And with that, I will turn it over to Glenn. And again, if we can, just we'll stop on each slide, ask if it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think as Rob said, we're sprinkling in some new and old information. some you've seen before, hopefully stitching together a complete picture of the enrollment scenario that we're facing in the district. So we've seen a version of this before. This one's been consolidated a little. It's a population chart for BVSD from two censuses, from the 2010, which are the big fat bars, and the thin bars are from 2020. So you can see the gains and losses in different parts and different age groups throughout the district. The real big takeaways from this are, going to the next slide, this one, wrong slide, got it, is really on the bottom of that chart, that youth population under 10, which has declined in 10 years. You may look over above it, the older students from 10 to 19, we actually show growth there, but similar to the how our enrollment is in the district, those smaller groups are going to be replacing those bigger groups and pushing those kids out. In fact, we're already 4 years into these data, right? Because this is 4 years old. And then the other big takeaway from it is the aging population in Boulder. Some groups above 60 have doubled in age, doubled in population, and I don't think anybody really sees those people, most of those people leaving anytime soon. I think most will probably stay, but that still remains to be seen. So those are the big challenges, that the aging population could be put limits on housing and turnover, and additional pressure on the housing market, something we haven't really seen to the degree in the past. And the other thing I want to bring up about it too is just the accuracy. The way it works in Boulder Valley, the census is only really good and accurate population data that we get. There are other survey data out there. There's ACS, Dr. Cog does some, the state demographer does some, but those estimates usually have pretty high margins of error that don't really allow a lot of this kind of analysis to take place. So the census is that once every 10 years where we can really narrow things down.
Stop right there. Any questions on this slide? Anything that jumps out at you?
One question, this is maybe a Randy question, but I look at the aging of the district, and I really want to make sure our communication is getting to the elderly people so that our bonds and mill levies continue to pass a decade from now, because we're going to have a lot of people who are going to be financially stressed on limited income, who will be the ones voting for our bonds in 8-10 years.
I guess one point of clarification, you talked about housing, the types of housing we're building that is being built out in Weld County and other parts is predominantly single-family housing, which is the type of housing I know in the past you've shown slides, Glenn, about the types of housing our family prefers. And so while in the city of Boulder and surrounding areas, you're seeing more stacked housing being constructed, which might explain some of the younger population growth that you're seeing in the 20s. It's the single family houses that our families tend to live in, and that's what's being built to a greater degree outside of our district rather than within our district.
Yeah, and to elaborate a little bit, in the previous 10, 20 years, we've seen turnover in certain neighborhoods, specific neighborhoods. Foothill had a burst of turnover about 10 years ago. More recently, Louisville had a pretty good burst, and South Boulder as well. And that kind of turnover is what I see being limited in the future.
This is useful to see this trend. It's not great one for us, but in terms of getting a little bit more focus, 'cause it really might vary quite a bit by census tract, by area. Are you able to kind of dial down at that sort of level to see how it looks east versus west, north, south, central across those different areas?
This is actually from block level data from the census, so we can get very, very small with it.
Yeah, I would be interested to see at some point, if it's easy to get, the data on when those neighborhoods do turn over. 'Cause I notice, like, even though that I live in South Boulder, Table Mesa, the houses are expensive, but the families moving in are having families. So I would be curious to see if there's any way we can predict that turnover or track it. Probably tracking's easier than predicting.
Yeah.
Glenn, how would we do that?
I've been thinking about that for 15 years. It's one reason why I got into this and this specific chart is to try to get ahead of that and identify neighborhoods. You can try to go through and find blocks, at least in the census, that have a higher percent of people over 60. That would be a place to start to kind of see where those neighborhoods are likely to kind of probably locked in place for a while, and then maybe look at neighborhoods with higher percentages of the even older groups. And really, again, all of this kind of comes down to births. This is a trend, national trend, but this is BVSD's trend for quite some time. This goes back to 2003, and actually, I've said this in the past, but we've had years where our kindergarten classes beat the birth trends. So it's not always a situation, but I think that limited housing is the factor now that we're facing, that we can't get that extra in-migration to help offset lower births. And then the average birth per woman too is also something. This is also a national trend, but it's something that's even more acute, I think, in higher educated areas like Boulder Valley. And just you see average children per woman falling over the decades. And that measure isn't just a reflection of women choosing not to have children at all. It's also smaller families. So it used to be we would see more, 3, 4, 5 children families. Now you definitely see more 1s and 2s. Got it? Yeah. And when we look at births by every single attendance area, so this is the geographic attendance area for each school, and capturing how many births from 2023 that were in those areas. We can see the variation. And then we also color coded the advisory and engagement schools, yellow and red accordingly. And to kind of see how they measure up. And it is interesting because definitely some schools like Coal Creek are on the lower side of the births, but surprisingly, a few of them are actually really in the middle of the pack in terms of how many births are actually in their attendance area. And so I think we really see the effects of open enrollment and movement within those areas.
Glenn, I think this is a really great slide, and I think it's really informative as we think about declining enrollment overall and our schools coming in and out of phases. I find it positive that Heatherwood's birth rate, despite being in engagement phase right now, is actually, higher than some. It's not as bad as I would have thought. So that feels promising for Heatherwood. So I think this is a great look as we continue to work through declining enrollment on specific schools. And then I saw some hands. Jason and then Alex.
The BC Creekside, BC Mesa, that just the overlap with Bear Creek.
Yeah. So that, that does make Mesas at the bottom there a little bit muddled because, there is a shared attendance area with Bear Creek.
Yeah, I would, if I were trying to soberize, I won't use that word, but to give people a sense, I would put over this the average class size lines just to get a sense of how much of a percent of the birth rate you need to get in order to have 2 or 3 classes in these schools. So we're going to get, 60, 70% of this amount and then divide them into 2 classes, and pretty quickly there isn't enough for 2 classes. So even if we were perfectly incentivizing everybody to choose to go from one to another.
To further triangulate this data, right, you would then potentially take the average percentage of kindergartners who enroll in their homeschool versus not enroll in their homeschool, right? Like, so to the extent that, okay, Heatherwood, you have, 45 kids, right? That's 2 classes, right? But if only 70% of the kids are going to Heatherwood, right, then you're going to have Y. You could look at those things to kind of have a sense of that, to the extent that those things are, those trends are predictable. or you could use a district average. We could look at it that way. Then we'd have to ask ourselves, and I think we have to ask ourselves this for everything that we work hard to look at and put together. How do we use it? Is that a signal to the community to say, okay, folks who don't have kids, if you all come to this school, this is what, because you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver either. You know what I mean? Like our class sizes depend, sometimes 2 or 3 kids can depend between us 1 or 2 classrooms. So interesting. I think it's good, an interesting trend. We'd have to think about the usability of that.
And this one is an estimate derived from census data. We looked at the school-age children in our district and compared that to our enrollment at the time the census was taken. And we got about an 85 to 15 split. So about 85% of the population of school-age kids went to BVSD schools. At that time, also did the same thing in 2010, very similar numbers, a percentage point off, but otherwise very close. And if we do that and we apply those rates to the 2023 enrollment, which we see on the bottom of the 24/7/24, that's our in-district enrollment last year, we get a total population of about 29,000 school-age students, and about 4,300 that do not attend BVSD. So presumably those go to private schools, home schools, and other districts, and maybe some other category, but I don't know what else that would be.
This is actually going back to the earlier slide. As you talked about understanding the role of open enrollment, which makes it so much trickier, and thinking about where those schools are located. So kind of triangulating all that information, right, in terms of the number of births, the open enrollment, and percent open enrollment, and then location of those schools to think about how we cover, right, the different spaces. Just one more piece of the puzzle.
I think that last step gets tricky. And Glenn, if you could speak to this, to the extent that we can think about a district-wide capture rate, through census data, can we think about like block capture rate? Like, how did you cut, like, because we looked at a couple different data sources to kind of figure this out, right? So the question Jorge is asking is, I think, the absolute right question. Like, what schools aren't serving the kids in their neighborhoods and they're going to homeschool or private school, right? But how would you even think about being able to pinpoint it down to the school level? Do we have that? Do we have that information?
So
or what would you need to do it?
I did run it at the elementary school attendance area level. So we do have it by attendance areas, how many students are quote unquote missing off of our rolls compared to the census. Again, that's an estimate because census boundaries don't match perfectly, but we do have it at that level.
Just to clarify that wasn't, I think we flip it, right? It's not so much what schools aren't serving, but the potential for a school to serve a broader group. That is more how I was thinking about it. And then this part of the capture, it seems like it's a broader issue. It may or may not be school specific because we have open enrollment, but I think you have to think about both sides of that and the potential for us to draw students back and depending on location, how we facilitate that.
That's a great reframing. I appreciate that.
Well, I guess one of the other things that'd be, when you're getting to it later in the data, but it sort of overlaps on it, I'm really curious to know what data we can extract from the exiting and entering of kids. So we know they come back at 6 and they come back at 9. So if we could ask every 6th and 9th grader where they were last year for the ones that show up, and then if we also knew where they were going to when they left, and then triangulate that data, then we have a better sense of the incremental change that's going on in the private school education.
Yeah.
So to pause, am I hearing consensus of the board that potentially getting access to that block data to know where the 15.1%, how that's broken down by school, would that be an additional slide that the board thinks would be helpful? Thumbs up, sideways, thumbs down to let us know. Nicole, you have what's the question?
I'm just wondering, I'm trying to think, through what would we do with that information? I guess that's, if we had the block data, and I'm not opposed to having it, but how would that change how would that make what we do different from what we know about the general 15% as a district tactic? And what is the small enough number? Like, do we decide it's not worth like an investment in 15 students or 3 students here or 50? Like, though that's where my question really lies, and how much work it's going to take to provide that information in a way that's useful. And then what are we going to do with it differently? That's my question. It's not that I'm opposed to getting the information, but like, how would we do something differently with that really fine-tuned information versus just that 15%? Lainey, then Beth.
I think it's a marketing opportunity. That's what I would say that we do with it, is that we say, if we can really know those pockets where we're losing so many kids, I think it's a marketing opportunity. So that's why I would want it.
And I was having a similar thought. It's a marketing approach as well as, kind of to Jorge's point, coverage, right? Exactly what you said, flipping it on its head. How are we going to attract kids and provide more coverage for our district? I think the data would probably be useful. I also did really like Alex's idea of having number of students enrolled too, overlaying that for the class sizes piece. I just want to throw that back out there.
Sorry, go Alex.
Oh, sorry. I agree with Lilenia and Beth. I guess one of the pieces I would add, if we identify that we're actually doing like an above average job of keeping BVSD kids at a school, but it's still under enrolled, then that's a different situation. Like the opportunity to grow isn't there. But the other part is to prioritize investment and say, oh, this is one where there's actually a big upside to making the school more attractive to the people nearby. And so we need to do both local communication about it, and maybe it's worth a little extra investment. Whereas if we had one that's already maxed out its local enrollment, but it's still under enrolled, then advertising's not going to do it, or promoting what's good. So I think it's same thing with accountability data. Like, it can be off-putting to give bad news about a school that people aren't attending, but that's how we're investing in our schools that have large achievement and growth gaps. And that investment then turns it around and makes it better. So I'm like, okay, let's be transparent about the data, use it to direct resources, and then use it to inform our communication. And then whatever the situation is, it'll be a different mix of implications.
Katie, then Jason.
So I'm ambivalent in terms of what information we as the board get, to Nicole's point, what we do. But I know that there are schools, well, at least I know that El Dorado, because I've talked to a couple of parents from there, they have parents who are really focused on building up the enrollment. And so if there's a situation like that, and that gets to Alex's point, I think we need to support them, because we've already got folks who are, volunteering to do this work. So, but do we need it for every school? Do we need to act on it for every school? I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a similar point that I don't know how hard this is to get this data, but more just, if we could at least get this information for schools that are in the advisory phase, and then maybe project it out 5 years, so we at least know, I think there was that chart of the schools that we anticipate being on that list in 5 years. So it might not be all the schools, but we would have a sense of where we could target our, advertising or, focus.
And I would say like an interesting overlay there is, if you think about our survey that we did with Magellan and the reasons why folks are not choosing us, that's also kind of by zip code, right? So we know the folks that are not choosing us for ideological reasons. And we know that folks that are choosing us because they can, from that data, afford to go somewhere else and follow their friend group elsewhere. So like, it's all of that information together that really would inform any sort of target marketing. And, so I think it's just really, it's a lot of things together that impact any decision we make to try to recapture those students. And so looking at one slice without the other is just, that's kind of where I was thinking. Sorry, Rob.
Glenn, this is more of a question for you. The further away we get from 2020, the less accurate this data is, correct? So I would just warn us to how we use this information. You know, it's already 4 years old. You know, in a couple of years from now, are we going to continue to use it? I would just warn us against relying on it too heavily. So.
Sorry, Jeff, I didn't see you raise your hand.
I didn't actually know I could say something. That's why I was asking Dr. Anderson. I just want to warn the board, equity has been a key focus of our committee. There is a danger of putting resources into schools where people are open enrolling out, that there may be a correlation between financial resources available to families in those schools and other things. So I would just be careful to not dump resources into schools where everyone's open enrolling out because they can go to Dawson or something like that as opposed to something else.
Rob has his hand up first before Alex, and then we'll go to Alex.
This data can also be helpful, not just for marketing, but when we review attendance areas. Like, we want those to be data-driven discussions, right? And we'll be doing that in the spring. So to the extent, and we're going to try some things on for size. I don't think anybody has any of this dialed in, and we're not going to let perfect be the enemy of good. And it could be we try some things, we do some work, and maybe we ask Glenn to do some stuff, and he comes back and says, I don't think this is useful. We share that with the board, or we say, look, this is something that could help us, and this is the ways in which it'll help us. So it's not just, I'm looking at this not just about marketing, and I mean, and by the way, we've got a great school district to market, Amy. You know that, so I was just talking back there. It's these other processes that. Whether it's attendance boundaries or even potentially other things that we could think about or I think a lot of this becomes helpful.
And I think to add on a little bit with what Rob said about the datedness of the data, is we had to use 2019 data for the comparison. The census is done as April 1, 2020, and we did not want to use 2020 data because a lot of kids were missing that year. So it's based off the October before the census.
Yeah, I want to be, well, I guess I would say the orientation we have towards the data, I would just encourage us to be really flexible and pragmatic and not say, here's the way we did it. Like to Rob's point, as the census gets longer in the tooth, then the exit entry data and the survey data becomes more important, our own enrollment data. So we sort of weight it depending on what's going on. And I also totally agree with the equity point of how we figure out where to invest. I just want to make sure that we have a comprehensive look into the investment, because like our locally raised money for the paras is such a grossly inequitable approach to resource investment that we need to sort of have all the chips on the table, I think, for that discussion of equity and investment.
So actually, the green piece here, the next few slides kind of cover trying to get at to what that 15% looks like. And the first place we start with is private schools. And unfortunately, we don't have a really good nailed in idea of how many kids from BVSD go to private schools. The CDE produces some data. We try to monitor data as well. That's mostly, frankly, just Google searches and going to websites and checking on things. We've also called a few districts as well. And but really pretty spotty at best. This is a compilation of the CDE data that Claire put together. And one of the problems with the CDE data, it's self-reported. There really isn't the kind of auditing process that public schools have, where the CDE requires information from the schools. So you can see over the years here, there's a lot of empty boxes, non-reported years, and we're not even sure of the accuracy of the years that are reported. One of the other difficulties too is not all attendees at a private school necessarily come from BVSD. We have Boulder Country Day, which is right on pretty close to the border with St. Vrain. Who knows what that split is with St. Vrain kids. That's another complication. And it's also monitoring when new schools open and when schools close as well. Usually I find out from the newspaper if it's reported. Otherwise, there's not a lot of sources for that. So in terms of finding out how much private school composes that 15%, I don't think we can really do it with any accuracy.
Just to add on to this, in preparation for this meeting, we have reached out to every private school. We've combed their websites, we've looked at their financial statements, we've sent emails out trying to find what their enrollment is, and we even have an incomplete data set. We only heard back from 7 or 8 schools. We will continue that until we can get an accurate data set. I just want you to be aware that we have put in the effort. It is very difficult to find. So this is the best we had, and didn't want to share with you an incomplete data set based on what we found.
Just a quick question. Do we have data around number of BVSD students enrolled at Hillside? I didn't see that one on here.
Yeah, this is only schools, I think above, what was it, Claire, 100, something like that. These are the bigger schools. She actually will show a larger data set with, I think, all of the schools. Is that right?
To get to the 4,300, I guess my question is that just using the data that's reported, or have you sort of filled in the boxes, assuming like average enrollment in the underreported years?
That is mostly from going to web pages and seeing what we can find and estimating where we have to based on past enrollment information that we can get, CDE where possible. I know Bill's office does a little work with finding those numbers as well.
Great. Your 4,300 is right where I got to it about 9 months ago from just quickly just sort of averaging across them. And then one of the things I've found interesting in looking at it was seeing which one of the ones actually have growth trends going on in them. So sort of like the Bixby's of the world sort of pop right out, even though they're small. And you see multiple of the school, like I know McIntosh is adding, and Bixby is considering adding middle school, you know, all sorts of things. So it's not just the total that's there, but it's also sort of seeing the growth patterns in some of them. Although, you know, they're small and modest, and there's a few big players, but it adds up.
And similar challenges with homeschool counts as well. So this is CDE is really the only source that we have for that, and this shows the trends for BVSD the last 10 years or so, or a little more than that. And again, self-reported data, no auditing process. I think there's generally a consensus, I know with at least other planners in other districts, that it is underreported with the CDE, that not everybody reports. So again, we have a big kind of data hole with exact numbers with that too. And there's also a quirk in the CDE reporting process where they allow students to basically choose their school district in the state to report to. So you can live in Durango and report to St. Vrain or BVSD as your reporting school, and those would be included on these numbers. So it's not necessarily based on where they live.
Yeah, I was thinking about that yesterday. So what do you, because on the slide, I think it said you registered to a district. How does that work? How does somebody who doesn't live in one district, I mean, they just tell the state their home district is a different one?
So my understanding is, and I think Bill's office are the experts on the registration process, but my understanding is that the state does ask parents to register with their local school district or choose a district, and then they report to that district. And then the CDE collects this information from the districts and reports it at a state level. So you have to report to a district. So, but what that law says is you can choose the district that you report to and put that information into. Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason I think that people register with different districts is different districts have different programs and services. So I'd be really curious to know if per person, like St. Vrain has a higher homeschooling proportion than us because they have a homeschooling program that would incentivize Boulder Valley homeschoolers to register in St. Vrain rather than us. So, I mean, I would look at the surrounding ones nearby that offer homeschooling programs and see if they are disproportionately higher, and then I would assume some of that is ours. So I don't know that we have, I'm curious what our programming is, but I don't think we have anything that compares with what St. Vrain is doing. So if we were to put those programs in, maybe we'd get some more of those that we would assume are registering in St. Vrain back to BVSD. Again, the benefits of that compared to solving our low enrollment problem is neither here nor there, but you can eventually get people interacting with the schools who might eventually decide to come back.
Kitty.
So I have a follow-up question. So how does it impact school districts if a family living in one place, and especially if it's not even close, like Durango to here, how does that impact local districts, both the one they're saying they're registering in and the one where they actually live?
Well, they're not enrolled, so there'd be no funding implication. So it's really just a matter of how it's reported to the CDE.
So does that mean the district they register with gets the per pupil funding, even if the student doesn't go to school there?
Well, there wouldn't be per pupil funding because these
Oh.
are homeschool kids. Yeah. Yeah.
Could athletics and activities play a role in this? So, I live in North Boulder. I wanna run track at Niwot, right? Because homeschool students do have the ability to participate in extracurricular activities, or vice versa. I live in Niwot and I want to run track at Boulder. So as a homeschool student, I would have to register in the district where I'd want to participate in the activities. And then potentially that could be a reason to go back and forth.
Well, and to that point, I think there are some of our rural communities in the state will set up homeschooling programs intentionally to get kids in to see the extracurricular activities. And then it's a kid on kid sort of lobbying like, hey, why don't you come all the time thing? So it is sort of an investment in that family to come back to the district by encouraging them to participate. And that's where I'd say, like in a place like Nederland, where we have intense declining enrollment, I don't know, it doesn't look like high numbers of online enrolled kids or homeschooling kids from any data I can find. But if we had a homeschooling program up there, like some of the rural communities do, we might have a better chance of keeping a higher proportion of the kids over time in the school.
I guess one thought, it's not a lot of students. K-12, we're looking at just over 300 students. And I think as BVSD continues to do the work it's been doing, we continue to be the highest performing school district in the Denver metro area. We continue to do what's right for all of our students. We will see, without even having necessarily to be strategic, I really believe our work speaks for itself. If we continue on that path, the students that want to be in a K-12 public school experience have no reason to not choose us based on our accreditation with distinction. And so it's a small number. I think focusing on the work can inherently draw folks in, maybe entertain, if, I could see why in some cases you would want to entertain specific programs to draw those folks in, but I think the work we're doing really does speak for itself and will make a really huge impact when that word gets out, along with our disproportionate discipline data. I mean, all those things, we are really serving our kids well. Alex.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the numbers are incremental and on the margins. I do think though that we might be more like 500 instead of 300 if we figured out who's registering elsewhere where the services are. And I think when we look at the interview data, like I look at the data on people who don't believe in the ideology of our schools. And I'm like, well, I don't think we're going to change our values. Those are our values and we care very much about them. But that's where I'm like, kid to kid exposure can show you that's like, no, people like you are in these schools and their families are thriving. So that's why I think of the online program rather than sort of, losing money by investing in stuff where you don't get much more and it does become a resource sink. I recognize that, but it is sort of an outreach thing that just sort of shows families that like their kids like being with the kids and stuff. And so in the long run, it helps. And if it's 450 or 500, then that's some more we can get. And it may be regional where it's different and we still won't know until we try. And I don't think we're trying that much for the homeschool population.
I will say one of the things that we have been tracking closely is homeschool program to the north of us. And that continues to trend downwards. So we'll continue to follow that. But I agree with you, Alex. I think that's grossly underreported, the 300 number. But we'll continue to follow what's happening north of us with that homeschool program. Might be something we want to consider in the future.
Just as a quick reminder, we did have
that homeschool focused program in the district. It was when the program that moved to St. Vrain was being run out of our district, and we closed it when there were 2 families and 5 kids left. And it was in the little church over here on 76th Street. So we did have that at one point in time, effective, questionable, but it was probably 7-8 years ago when we closed it down, just because it was not cost effective for the minimum 2 classes to make sure that the kids were funded at least half-time. So
I will add, the kids are funded half-time when they're in it. And placing them in the schools would be different than placing them elsewhere in terms of being able to try to keep them. So and it's post-pandemic, it might be worth giving it another try after more families gave it a try and are still trying to do it on their own. But I'm totally interested in being smart about it.
And the last component of that 15% of kids are students going to other districts. And this slide is meant to kind of get a feel for that. I've only included data for schools in the immediate area around the district, not all school districts, because there is some flow for online programs as well all over the state. But for the purposes of our study here, this is just the school districts around us that are likely to commute in and out.
Glenn, I really like this view, particularly because depending on where each of us live or the people that we come in contact with, we have preconceived notions about what is happening with our student population. So it is really nice to see the net transition between our neighboring school districts in a very clear way. So I like this view, and I think as we can continue to think about declining enrollment, this will be an interesting one to watch. And as we think about declining enrollment, and I would also say, given our changes in policy preferences and JECCR and some of our other things, what the impact is of those policies as we're watching the movement of students would be important to continue to keep track of this data.
Just real quick, we exchanged data with neighboring school districts, so we're able to prove a lot of this out. We do not exchange data with Gilpin, and I've reached out to them now on a couple different occasions. We do not believe in this number where we're losing 79 students. Dr. Anderson's met with Nederland parents. I've met with Nederland parents. I continue to bring this idea up. Principals up in Ned just don't see the kids. This is like homeschooling. It's been very hard to prove out that we're actually losing 79 kids. This is where we need to continue to do more work on. I'm afraid that number is not accurate. But however, the other data is very reliable as we look at that just based on the information we exchange. Just want you to be aware of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is really powerful data. And you've got other stuff on the individual school and catchment zones that come up from the matrices. I think it's also helpful really to see the total in and out. And so this is the net, but I think it's also really good to know, because it's the outward migration is, again, the opportunity we have to serve a higher proportion. So if we can figure out how to retain those that are leaving. So, and I know it's like another 1,000, 1,100 going out and 2,400 coming in. So if we can figure out how to keep that 1,100, that's a lot. So.
Yeah, and to give us some perspective on the nets too, I think like St. Vrain's, for example, I think we lose about 550 to St. Vrain, but we get 650 plus from St. Vrain. Adams 12, we lose like 200 or so, but we get more than 1,000. So the net isn't always the full picture, but it is a good clean way to show the data right off the bat.
But it would be just an extra column, right, to do the in out and then the total. Board members, do you think that would be an improvement on this? Okay.
And also, it might be on a few. I feel like I've seen it, but is there like to know which schools these kids are going to? That would be helpful too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And this is another view of the students that come into our district from out of the district. And unfortunately, we can't do this the other way around because we don't have student level data from other schools. But this is a good idea of where we can see the concentrations of those students, obviously around Broomfield, somewhat in Jeffco and Erie as well, and also Longmont and the city of Longmont in that area as well. So to tie in the data of that 15% that don't go to a BVSD school, part of that missing piece is the survey work we've been working on. And this is from the survey from January 2023 of the whole district. And one of the questions on that was targeted right at students who live in BVSD but don't send their kids to a BVSD school, and asked them, why not, basically. And 68% indicated that they would consider BVSD in the future. One thing to consider is that is PK through 12, so that could include a lot of PK students, which are likely to go to a BVSD school. So it's a little skewed upward in that respect, but I think otherwise it's a good number. And then there were 23% said that they would not consider BVSD, pretty much under these circumstances kind of thing. That was 72 respondents in total. And those are the three reasons why not. Disagreement with the district's ideology or curriculum, concern over school size or safety, and the last one, seeking a different program for a child's specific needs, which I think most would interpret as special ed or GT or twice exceptional and things like that. And of course, 9% were undecided.
Can you just give me a little more overview? I'm trying to figure out how the 23% and the 72 add up to the total of like 1,100 and the N. So can you go over again what the?
So the survey is, I believe 1,100, and the 1,100 responses, and the 214, 72, and 28 would add up to the number that lived in BVSD but did not attend a BVSD school. So so basically, the bullets on top are a subset of that, of the overall data number provided at the bottom. I can get more details on that later if we need to.
Yeah, just to clarify. So the 214 is 68% of what, I guess? There's 214 total that may go to the BVSD in the future versus 72 who wouldn't, and that's 286 out of the 1,100? That's why I'm confused.
Yeah, we can get some clarification and pull that together.
I think the interesting to note here is that, you're depending upon what percentage of those folks concern over school size, safety, and or culture, the percentage of that had concern with culture, you could potentially be looking at, over 50% of folks who just don't believe in what the vast majority of the community believes in. And so, even if you were to just take that as an average number, right, that in any slice of this, that 50% of the folks who aren't coming, aren't showing, aren't choosing other things could have that issue, it still leaves a lot of families who do that isn't the case. I do think that the first time we gave this survey, first time we started really digging into this was really striking to me that there's just, and I think that we see that, and we see that with emails to the board and public comments, and that there are from time to time individuals whose opinions vary greatly from the collective values of our community. And so just knowing and understanding that's a barrier that we will never, I don't know that you or ever will be able to overcome, because we are who we are, we believe what we believe, and we do that strongly and with conviction. And so I just think it's an interesting thing to point out.
And on this type of sample size out of this, and by the way, the first three numbers are the things that add up to the possibilities of 100% here, the 60, 23, and 9 or whatever. But also surveys of this type, when you're dealing with possibly ideological notions here, are notoriously poor samples. So you get people who have a specific agenda they want to do. Some of those you see in email. So I would say extrapolating this to the full number would be pretty risky. Maybe you.
And then pulling this information together, looking at our enrollment slides, we've seen this one numerous times. We are on generally a downhill slope since about 2017. Correlating births that we saw earlier with our kindergarten classes. There was a time when our kindergarten classes actually came in bigger than the births that happened 5-6 years. It's no longer the case. And we've been tracking pretty closely right below that birth line with our kindergarten classes. More recently, the ratio has been even dropping further until this year. It looks like at least our preliminary kindergarten classes is bigger than projected by over 100 students. And we're probably back to about the 92% ratio, which was closer to what we were historically. Any comments?
This is really encouraging. So, and the slide before with sort of the decreasing line of, or a slowing descent. So I'm really encouraged by both of those numbers. One of the things I'd be interested in seeing in the next cut would be some of the data on the pre-K enrollment and a sense of how we're doing proportionally there. And then I think one of the other resources we have at our disposal to think about is the placement of the pre-K programs, or like the percent of kids identified in Child Find that pick us for the preschool. So anyway, I'd love to add the pre-K component to this and see if part of the 92, getting a higher proportion of the kindergartners than we might expect is related to the excellent high quality preschool that we have and the extra investment we're making in it. He says, looking at Amy.
And of course, just getting the point of our enrollment declines coming from the small classes that we have been getting over the years in kindergarten, and as those filter up through the grades, we're seeing small classes all the way through 8th grade and coming into high school now. And that brings down the overall enrollment of the district.
Awesome. Real quick.
Oh, awesome.
Any questions?
And out of district enrollment, had been on the downward slide, and then 2002 started ticking up, coming off of COVID possibly. And last year, a big jump in out of district students, possibly due to changes in the OE, requiring commitments earlier might have helped, and possibly our outreach efforts that the district's been doing since that time.
It's because BVSD is the place to be.
Yes.
If you go up on the graph above, I guess or one slide earlier. So I look at the jumps at the grade level changes and then the stability for the grades after them, with the exception of the high schools where it looks like the actual enrollment grows throughout. And what I see there is the return of families, like, okay, elementary is one thing, but I want my kid in the district middle school, and then I want my kid in the district high school. And part of that is just family expectations for what's going on versus sort of small customized private schools, I would suspect, versus wanting to get their kids into the system by the time the transcript starts showing. But then I see, like, we're so stable. Are our middle and high schools too crowded to not continue growing? Or is it a function of the families just, like, do we have a ton more desire to enroll in 6th and 9th grade? Or are we sort of limited by the facilities in the middle and high schools?
We have been limited at the high school level. In previous years, we were starting to max out. Boulder High probably was the best example, but other schools were hitting their capacity as well, and we're coming off that now. So part of it can be that we have more capacity being created in the high school level to bring in more out of district kids.
On the middle school level, I mean, I think as we think about the interdistrict choice going on and the reputations of our strong performing schools on the borders, like if we have more space in our middle schools, then I would be thinking that the communicating how good that middle school sixth grade is would be a fruitful way to boost interdistrict choice.
Yeah, there is capacity at the middle level, and there has been in recent years, yes.
So we've been publishing this graph for close to 20 years. And those jumps at those transitional grades have always been there for forever. And certainly, I would suggest that capacity probably isn't an issue if we were way up at the top of that, at some point in time. So it's looked like this for a very long period of time, as those big classes at the high school moved backwards in time when they were the largest classes ever at those particular grade levels. And then it started shifting. And now we're at the end of the large ones moving out.
You mentioned, kids coming back from the pandemic and others, but this looks like this was probably pre-showcase in fall of 23. So what other strategies could have accounted for, outreach strategies could have accounted for, that's a significant, almost 200 kids increase there.
I think 23, that's not this year's enrollment.
Last fall's.
The reason we're seeing this bump is we now have room in our facilities. I mean, that's it. We're able to accept more open enrollment. Is that, yeah.
I guess I'd be really interested then when we look at the open enrollment data to find out the likelihood that people trying to enroll from outside the district were able to enroll and how many we turned away because of space. And especially in light of like the latest state performance data with our accredited with distinction rating compared to the other districts of our size in the geographic area, we could be very attractive to families who are trying to find the best place for their kids to be. And so it would be interesting to see the difference between in-district people getting their choice versus getting a later choice, and out-of-district people getting no choice at all in terms of being able to enroll.
That brings up for me all of our commuters coming in, and Rob and I have talked about this. We have all these commuters coming, and I would be concerned if somebody tried to open enroll to a particular school as a commuter. Do we reach out to them if there wasn't room at a particular school? Do we reach out to them and say, but hey, can we talk about a different school? Like, are we making sure that anybody we bring in from outside the community, we're really trying to get them ingrained in our community?
More to come on that idea later in the presentation. Don't turn your channels.
Sure. To address Board Member Medler's first question about the capacity of our schools to be able to offer seats to families wanting to come to us from out of district, the vast majority of our schools, due to declining enrollment, as Rob Price just shared with us, do have the capacity to accept students from out of district. And so what our process has continued to be is throughout the spring, from the beginning of March all the way through the end of August, we look at every single school's wait list every single week. Because during that period of time, families continue to apply through late OE applications and show interest in each one of our district schools. And because we have increased capacity at the vast majority of our schools now, we are able to clear those wait lists and offer seats to families who do want to make our schools their homes. And so very, very few of our schools, only those that are limited either programmatically or due to physical space, then have wait lists that continue through the start of the school year.
How many schools end up with a wait list still?
Well, we can get the exact number for you, but I would say those are a few of our district schools, like Boulder High School, as Glenn referred to a moment ago. Some of our choice schools that are limited programmatically, for example, New Vista or BCSIS, for example, in certain grade levels. And then there are schools who have very limited space due to continued growth, like Meadowlark or Ryan Elementary. However, like I said before, the vast majority of our schools are able to accommodate families who would like to enroll there.
I think it'd be really interesting to see the cleaning of the wait lists and getting folks in. I guess the other question I've had though from observing it is, what do we do when we're up against sort of the 2 classroom limit and we've got 59 kids, and there might still be a wait list, but we won't put in 2 more kids on the wait list because then we need a 3rd class size and spend another $150,000 for those 2 kids. How often is that sort of calculation coming into play? Because that's where I'm like, I don't know how we have the room. Like, we want to grow from elementary schools with 2 classes to 3 in order to differentiate instruction. But if we can't get over the hump from 2 to 3 in an economically viable way, how often is that getting in the way of people applying to the school? Because I think once people know last year they weren't able to get in, then they don't apply the subsequent year because they think it's too hard to get in and they get strategic about everything. So what do we do when we're at that borderline of 2 to 3 classrooms per cohort, and how does that affect the wait lists?
I'll share just some high-level thoughts, and then Robin, please add details. In the past, those aren't thresholds that we've gone over, right? And so, to the extent that that you add, you get 2 more kids to show up, and then you split it. Our average teacher salary and benefits is $125,000 ish, not including para. Then it's 140 ish. Right, and then the amount of revenue coming in for 2 students is 20,000 ish. So to the extent that there's a business kind of proposition in when do you go over, and and how does that help and benefit you? But it's short term and long term as well, right, Alex? The more people that need students that you grow. So I think that's a practice we can reflect on. It would be interesting to have the information on the folks that were, but sometimes those folks then get their second choice or third choice. So if folks have 3 choices, right? So it's not just one choice. And so I don't know that we have to date have collected that data over time. I'll let Robin kind of speak to that, but it's something we could certainly look at and understand. But because we have to allocate, there's a couple things that can happen. Because the way we allocate staff today in March and we don't pull back if kids don't show up, right? We try to stay at our staffing levels. Now, if we were to change that, we'd have to work with BVA and others to do what a lot of districts do, which is if you have teachers and kids don't show up, you can pull those teachers from places that maybe are under-enrolled and place them somewhere else. Might be a change in business practices, but what we've traditionally done is then we just added more people. So I guess I would be, and I know we're going to shift to some of that open enrollment analysis, but I'm curious to understand the dynamics. Like, for a lot of the long-range advisory committee work, we're talking families are inspired by, like, what programs and staff can we keep if we don't decline more? What can we get back to a full-time librarian and PE teacher if we were 3 cohorts? But if our open enrollment process never allows us to go from 2 cohorts to 3 because the first 5 kids are totally unaffordable for the 3rd cohort, then we never will be able to grow to the 3rd cohort. So unless 30 kids suddenly applied in 1 grade at a time. So that's what I'm trying to understand as we're trying to manage the open enrollment process. It seems like we're in a box of keeping 2 cohort elementary schools without the option of having them become popular enough to grow if there's this financial cliff of getting from the first 1 or 5 kids.
The other thing to consider is that most of our open enrollment does come from within district. So if you let folks grow beyond a 2 to 3, you could have schools with 1 or a half. And so that's the complexity, right? Like that's the complexity. And then you'd want to make sure that our folks that live here in our district have the first, like our preferences, they get the first choice. And you wouldn't want to go over for folks out of district like that. That would not be, I think, a good policy change. But this is all the calculus that I think that we need to think about. I think you're thinking about the right things.
Well, and I guess I would add, I mean, I think we have, we have the reality of the finances of the budget and the way Colorado finance works. But I do think we need to have our communities fully aware of the trade-offs that come with the commitments we've made, the commitments to our teacher compensation, the commitments to holding the schools harmless when the enrollment drops for that first year. So there's another trade-off, just like subpay and parapay and other things where we said, no, we're going to hold all under-enrolled schools harmless for the first year of them getting below that threshold, which means that we can't have the flexibility to add cohorts where the families want to go. So at some point we have boxed ourselves in to being unresponsive to the wishes of the parents by the other commitments that we've made.
So I was going to add, kind of related to this, and I know we're talking about open enrollment and actual trends and things coming up in the slide deck, but every year I've done an RFI, and I think folks before me have done, like, where are students applying? Where are there wait lists that exist? That's not presented here. We get a lot of core requests every year about what are my odds of getting into XYZ school? And I think that is really important for us. It's part of this conversation, so I'm bringing it up now, for us to share that information on dashboards with our families. We need to make that clear, A, to save us money and time and core requests, and B, because those are really frequently asked questions. And it will dispel some of the myths around, like, I can't get into this school, because there are very few schools with wait lists at this point that are like non-charter schools. And there are some outliers, but the vast majority of our schools, we still have some space. And so making that data really available for families, not just for the board to look at in our decisions, I think is really important, just to make this process more clear. So sorry for adding that in like 10 slides early, but the conversation came up. Robin.
So you're right, just to add a little bit more detail to fill in the blanks. So there are some important benchmarks throughout the OE lottery period throughout the spring and the summer. And this is really largely due to the fact that we've worked hard to be as responsive as we can to families in our communities, because we want them to be able to find a place at the school that feels the most like home for them. We are more alike than we are different, obviously, but there are differences, and we want families to be able to enroll their children in places where they want to be. And so to that end, for the past couple of years, what we have done in our initial OE lottery, which is after the lottery closes at the beginning of January and the lottery is run, is that any in-district family that submits an on-time OE application is automatically granted their first choice, as long as it's a school that's not limited either in capacity or due to program capacity. Now, having said that, then based on that initial number, we try to backfill, if you will, with families who have applied for OE in order to complete full sections. However, you are right that the further we go in the spring, it becomes a little more complicated in terms of opening seats for families who would like to attend schools in specific grade levels, while at the same time not creating those inefficiencies that both you and Dr. Anderson spoke to a minute ago. So it does become a little bit like a Rubik's Cube as we move further and monitor every grade level in every single school every single week. However, having said that, it is true that a large percent of our families do choose 1, 2, and 3 choices in their open enrollment application. And so that does provide that flexibility. If we are not able to offer a seat at one choice, we can offer them a seat at, choices 2 or 3. And sometimes we do reach out to specific families and say, hey, we realize that you live in X location and we can't offer you a seat at this school, but we do have space in this other school. We have not traditionally done that with every single family, but we do when we notice that there are families who have provided us with 3 choices, and we are not able to accommodate those. However, at this point in time, that's very rare. Very, very rare. And so as we continue to progress through the spring and the summer, until our wait lists come to an end, and in district schools, that is September 1st, and in charter schools, that is October 1st, we continue to monitor because enrollment does fluctuate significantly in schools during that time. Families let us know that they will be moving out of state or out of our district. Other families move in. And so the enrollment of resident families in a specific school attendance area fluctuates in addition. And so that's part of that calculation as we continue to monitor enrollment on a weekly basis, so that as families notify us of departures, then we are able to offer seats where they are available in specific grade levels. So that's just a little bit more to the complexity of that work as we move from March until the start of school.
I would love to see the information on the sort of the waiting list waxing and waning. And then I think you do have the data on the people coming in and out in the later months throughout the year. I guess I have two questions related to that. One is, and Robin, you might be the best one for this one, and that's how many double grade classrooms do we do as a district? Like, how often do we say, oh, let's do a 2-3, let's do a 3-4, and add that, 2 halves together if the opportunity exists? When I grew up in a small elementary school, for some reason I think I ended up in the mixed one. I was always behind, and they were differentiating by the level of the kids within that mixed classroom, honestly. And so we had differentiated instruction and the flexibility of adding grades with multi-age classrooms. Or combining that with a looping process to have, different flexibilities that allow both differentiated instruction and different sizes of classes that aren't linked totally to cohort by cohort. And then I have a follow-up point I just want to make. My kids were at Fairview and graduated, 4 and 5 years ago, and the open enrollment into the district at Fairview made it cheek to jowl at its peak. And we definitely got, I believe, past capacity in order to accommodate out of district enrollment, which was not great for our kids.
So to the topic of multi-aging, there are schools that we have that part of their programmatic focus is to have multi-age classrooms. And a couple of examples of that would be a community Montessori, that part of the Montessori vision and educational approach includes that. BCSIS is another example of a school that loops, where teachers follow students in a single age classroom, 2nd grade, for example, and then the same teacher may teach those same students in 3rd grade. However, in the past, we have had certain multi-age configurations at different schools that have been a response to specific enrollment numbers and enrollment needs. We don't currently have any of those, but that is a strategy that we are exploring in alignment with the topic of enrollment at schools, but also thinking about the topic of educational experience that we continue to focus on in our long-range advisory committee work, that we are balancing the resource component with the educational experience, and how is it that we can use that to maximize the students' educational and academic, social, emotional experiences that they have in schools every year proactively through a multi-age approach.
I do think that it can get tricky if you have one multi-age class and one not multi-age class. And with the idea that you have to balance classes, and then you place some folks in one program over the other, not because of a choice for programming, but just because of just from a financial perspective. And I do think that we've really tried to avoid that. There have been instances where I've seen principals make decisions where instead of having one 2nd grade teacher and one 3rd grade teacher, they do 2 multi-age teachers. And one of the things that I think that's very interesting and a very potentially promising practice is the idea of in the later elementary school grades, this idea of departmentalization to get down certain ratios of kids to teacher at certain times, right, for certain instructional purposes. And so I do think that those are things that we're exploring as we begin to start to wrestle with this. The multi-age is a solution and looping is a solution. And then those certainly can have positive impacts for folks who want that. But if you show up to your neighborhood school and you're, the neighbor across the streets with the one teacher that's a full grade, and then you're in the half teacher with the multi-age, and with the understanding that our teachers don't have the multi-age teaching experience. It's typically the first time they've done that. I do think that those are things that can be limitations in doing some of that. But there are different ideas and other things, and how can we leverage staffing in different ways.
And moving on, showing projections. I don't know if this group has seen this particular slide, but showing the 5-year projections broke down by middle, elementary, and high. The line reflecting general fund schools only. Those are the non-charter schools, essentially. And just really, basically, we're trending downward on it. We anticipate a slow downward trend. We did beat expectation a bit this year. We'll probably be a little closer to 27,000. But otherwise, I think that the trend is still valid and will hold for a while. Any questions? And of course, all of this kind of culminated with LRAC being formed in recent years, and for the elementary level, coming up with criteria for the advisory status of 2 rounds, less than 2 rounds or less than 60%, and community engagement status of 1.5 rounds or less than 50%. And the map shows the yellow engagement schools and orange or the yellow advisory schools, I should say, and the orange engagement school, which is the only one right now, is Heatherwood. This is for the 23-24 school year, and how that's broken out by geographic area, with Broomfield, Lafayette, and Erie on the left, and North Boulder and the mountain communities in the middle, and South Boulder and Louisville Superior on the far right of that graph. And this is one of Claire's charts, and she'll talk a little more detail later on how it will work and what we hope to do with it in the future.
And I think this is an opportunity to take a clean break as we get into dashboards next. Is that fair?
Welcome back to the next part of this very exciting conversation on enrollment trends. Who is going to lead us through a data dashboard conversation? All right. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to take a second to give kudos to the whole team on this. This is just a wonderful presentation and preparation, and just the deepest discussion I've seen in a year here on the board. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. And I also just want to shout out and say thank you also to team members. So Glenn has been just a great collaborator on this project and lent so much of his expertise about this. Mike Wilcox, who couldn't be at the meeting today, but also just lent so much expertise, and we'll be talking through some of the data from his shop as well. So what I will be walking through are some concepts of data dashboards. Kind of similarly to our work session last month. These are, as you'll see, in draft form. We really would love your feedback on these ideas. Is this helpful information? What else can we add or consider? And really the concepts are, how can we take this information? Again, some of it Glenn presented and really gave you the narrative, but how can we take this a little further, put it in your hands in these interactive dashboards, and kind of bring you in on this complex picture of looking at all these various data sources and putting the picture together. So with that, I just wanted to point out a few things as we dive into this data. Most importantly, we use multiple data sources. As you've seen a little bit of that so far, we have even more data sources to dive into today if you're not satisfied already with that, to really get that comprehensive picture. So with that, some of these are real time, some of these data sets are point in time. As we've talked about, October count is a really key snapshot that we take every year, which will typically include our K-12 funded students. We do often include charter schools. We'll call that out if they're not included. And then we also are going to be including some open enrollment and ongoing enrollment data that are more real time as well. So I have included some headings on the reports, and I'll point this out on our on the looks as we go through, but kind of generally bucketing this into historical data, current data, or future projection. That would really be the open enrollment kind of application process. And whenever possible, we try to include a base rate. Again, we've looked at a lot of data over time, and we know that it's a changing picture. So we try to include base rate, a comparison point, or that trend over time to really give the full context. So the first look that I'm sharing here, this is a draft concept of looking at annual enrollment trends, drilled down a little bit deeper than what Glenn had shared. So this is now looking at numbers of students in programs, in special programs across the district. So our groups here are emerging bilingual students, students eligible for free and reduced lunch, gifted and talented, special education, and twice exceptional. And so that's what these clusters of bars are showing by group. And then we have trends over year from October count, going back to 17, 18. So pause here for a minute. I think bringing in that program lens to this conversation as well. Okay. So this is another look at the birth data. So the source for this data set is the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. This is a historical report. On the top chart, there is, you can see kind of a blue, light blue shaded area. That is the overall trend line that Glenn had shared earlier to show that decline over time. Additionally, I've broken this out on the dashboard form into 3 geographic areas that we tend to look at as we group our schools and communities within the district. So you can do a little bit of comparison there between regions. I know that was a question that came up earlier. And then below that is actually the full data set in a table form. And then this, let's see, goes back to 2006. Additionally, in that table, the shading indicates birth years that are the current kindergarten class.
That's helpful to have sort of this really deep slice to answer some of the questions that the board had asked earlier. I think this slice of the data is helpful for the board. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks. All right. And then we would plan to provide the full table. It didn't fit on one slide, so I just put that out here. Again, we have a lot of data to share.
Claire, I'm trying to remember. Is this a slide that the board had asked for us to put the current kindergarten class to see how births relate to the number of kids that actually enroll at kindergarten level? Would that be helpful at this slide? Okay.
And where are you thinking for this particular dashboard to live on? Where would it live?
Yeah, I think we're considering a suite of dashboards all around, focused around these enrollment data.
I think that that'll be, as after we go through the data cuts, I think that then we should have a conversation as a governance team. What should be, where does the data live? How often do we take a look at it together? What are the critical decisions? I mean, we can go back to the second slide on the decision points. What data points are what are important before to inform what decisions? So more of a conversation on kind of how that fits, but there's, this can be, we can put it anywhere and revisit, just depending on when we can get the data. There's certain times where it makes sense to revisit.
I have an additional wish list thing, and I think it's true for the previous stuff too, but I'm really curious to know about the pre-K connection to this as well. And I think we have a lot of strategic options around the pre-K in terms of placement and design. So it's really good to see the uptake that we have there in correlation with these births as well.
All right. The next slide, so you have seen this before that Glenn shared, but these are the long-range advisory committee metrics. So this was just taking this information and again, kind of putting it into an interactive dashboard, which this is the concept of it. I'll note that, so there are 5-year projections with this data. So I would recommend that we add a toggle so you could go year by year and look at how the map changes. And then also, once we have this in an interactive format, we could add like hover over, pop up to really dig into the specific numbers for each school. Okay, this one I'm excited to share. This is really drawn quite directly from the open enrollment matrices that Glenn prepares every year. We put our heads together and kind of thought about how could we, like, what would this look like in terms of an interactive dashboard and making that information very visual? Because if you've looked at those tables, that's very rich information, but it's kind of easy to get lost in the details of it. There's quite a lot to take in. So what we've done here, I'll walk you through the different parts of it. So on this slide, again, this is annual historical data we're looking at. This is at the elementary level. The top 2 circles, the charts at the top are showing 2 different looks at our students. So on the left, we have the total BVSD students that reside in the district. And we can break apart that group depending on whether they are attending their own neighborhood school. That's the largest kind of gray part of that pie, that slice. We can see how many of those students go out to a different neighborhood school. So we're using the open enrollment process to choose a different school and district. How many go to a focus school in the district, a charter school, or have a placement for a specific program or services. So that's kind of looking at of the students who reside in BVSD. Then on the right side, we can look at our enrollment composition. So just kind of a shift of that perspective. So of our total students enrolled in BVSD, again, we can break that down. How many are attending their own neighborhood school? Again, that's the majority here. Who has open enrolled to their school from within the district? Who has open enrolled from out of the district? And again, we have that placement category. And a few unmatched students come in there as well. So that's just breaking down what those 2 sides are looking at. And then below, the bar charts show that breakdown year over year. So we can see how those trends have progressed over time.
I want to say, as somebody that has looked at the open enrollment matrices for the past 9 years, this view is so much more easily digestible than the other views. And what I like the most is previously you would have to toggle between all the different, you'd have to have all the different matrices open to see the year over year changes and shifts. I like that it is all, at least, the previous 5 years are in the same place. And so this view, I think, as schools are looking at their own enrollment, specific enrollment data, the district is looking at its enrollment data, is helpful to have all of that in one spot. I think much improved, as much as I like the old matrices, and I spent so much time with them. I think most people, this will be far easier to understand. And the other thing I think is interesting here is it shows how, despite declining enrollment, there is some degree of stability when you look at those the charts at the bottom of this as well, which is interesting to see. And I saw Alex's hand, then Kitty's hand.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is super cool, and I think the trend time is really very helpful. A small graphic thing, I would probably go for more contrasting colors on each of the graphics. Just for my 59-year-old eyes, it's hard to tell the differences in the greens. And then it would be interesting somewhere to get a sense of, like, when you combine this with the total number of kids that aren't in the in the neighborhood school in the first place. So the students residing in BVSD there, like this isn't taking into account the exit to the private schools or the homeschooling or the open enrollment out of the district. So I'm curious how like the N of 6706 reflects that total for actual residents that aren't involved in the open enrollment process, or if they are, it's in another districts.
Okay, so I feel like an idiot because I don't get this, and I'm really glad I never tried to look at the more confusing presentations of data. So, and I don't even know if I need to get this as long as I get the lesson of it. But on the left of kids who live in the district, we have 12% open enrolling out to different neighborhood schools within the district. And on the right, these are the kids who are enrolled, some of whom don't live here, but 29% of them are open enrolled from within the district. So why are those two not the same number if they represent people changing schools within the district?
The one on the left is only BVSD students residing in the district. The one on the right includes students that are open enrolling from outside the district. So, and at the elementary level only.
So when it says on the right, in that yellowish color, OE from within district, that
Right.
includes people who are not residing in the district?
Nope, they're OE-ing out of their neighborhood school, but they're resident students. Am I
So
saying that
I
right?
still don't understand. Then what about on the left, the OE to, or it says out to different neighborhood schools?
It's because the base.
Part of the issue too is you have a different baseline in the percentage. So you have a smaller number of total population with just the in-district kids. So that's 1%. And then you're going to add in out-of-district kids. That's more kids. So that's going to change the percentage. It's going to be a smaller percentage.
Yeah.
I don't get it, but that's fine.
The other piece is, so, and this will help when the colors are updated a little bit more. So on the left chart, so notice that we have OE in the 3 green colors. So it could be to OE to a neighborhood school, to a focus school, to a charter school. We do that break apart just to get more information. The yellow on the right is just all open enrollment. So those kind of get more lumped together on that side.
Let's not spend time on that. Everybody else gets it.
No, Kitty, I'm sympathetic because that's where I was confused too, where we're dealing with, and maybe it's the label on the top left circle. So I don't think that is students residing in BVSD. That's students residing in BVSD, attending BVSD schools.
Yes.
Right? Versus BVSD enrollment composition is BVSD enrollment composition, including all kids from within and outside the district. And so they're not coming from the same universe, right? 2 different groups. And if you had another graphic that was to take the figure on the left, but include the number of kids who have open enrolled outside the district, the number of kids who aren't accounted for, stuff like that. Might be an extra thing. This is still really powerful. I like it.
And I would add, it makes my head spin a little bit too, and I'm working on this all the time. I think when we get to, I'll show a couple examples where we get to a school level, and to me, that's a lot more understandable where we can put like a school name on it and really break it down that way. So hang with me on it.
Clear on that one though. Inside the circle accurately labels the left-hand side. So total BVSD students residing in the district. We'll have to carry that heading up above. Yeah. To address what Alex is saying.
Okay, so similarly, we can do this breakdown for middle school. That's the next slide. Middle level. Again, kind of seeing similar trends and some of those trends holding over time as well. And then at the high school level. All right, so here's what I alluded to. I pulled a couple examples of specific schools. So this first one we're looking at in Foothill Elementary. And so this is kind of built similarly, but we have some of their drill downs we can do here. So again, the top we have our two pie charts basically. So on the left, students who live in the Foothill attendance area, BVSD students residing in that area. What percentage are attending their own neighborhood school? What percentage are out to a different neighborhood school, focus school, or in this case, a placement out of that school? And then on the right is the Foothill enrollment composition. So kind of the other way we can slice up that data. Now, what I find helpful is just below that, then we can ask questions about, okay, specifically, if these students are on the left living in the Foothill attendance area, but open enrolling to a different school, where do they go? And we can see the breakdown there. And then on the right, of those students who are enrolled into Foothill from another area, where are they coming from? So again, kind of both sides of that coin.
Again, I think this is super cool. For the enrolling from and enrolling into, it might be useful to have them ordered in the same way. Like see the right one sort of sorted by the change, but on the left, I'm not sure what the order is since it seems to start over again. But if they could see that like Superior has, or whichever ones have some in and some out the same place.
Yes, and just to explain that a little bit more to you, and this could be more clearly labeled, they are grouped by neighborhood school, focus school, charter school.
That helps.
Would I also like the addition at the very bottom of this, showing the net? I think as schools are looking at their own data, that trend over time really allows for a lot of questions to be asked. So I think that is also very helpful, that net over time. And what does that look like as schools are looking at their own, school accountability is looking at their data, as the LRAC is looking at individual data as schools are moving through the different phases. So I think that is also really helpful. And I do like how you did, I caught that maybe the gradations of color could be a little bit more distinct, like Alex's recommendation on the previous slide, to make it clear that those are choice and then charter and neighborhood schools, with maybe just a different color choice. But I think this is really helpful information at the site level in a lot of ways.
Yes, I really like the chart at the bottom because it does give us some perspective, but would it be possible to maybe add, as part of that change, the overall enrollment trend? If it's increasing or decreasing, then that kind of gives a little better perspective on that net number and what it means, and they get a better sense of capacity for a school. But great chart.
Yeah, agreed. One of the other things I've seen sometimes I think is helpful for people to track the proportions over time are sort of the stacked ones on top, but with lines. So you can sort of see continuity from year to year, but you can also see the proportionate balance of each year over time. I think that one's, I can talk to you later to clarify what I mean, but I think that one's relatively intuitive to see. And like on the net enrolled thing at the bottom, it really helps to get a vertical axis on it, somewhere. So people won't, so they can interpret that up moving line the right way sooner.
Did I hear a recommendation to then also add building capacity? Right. So with the idea being is if parents were to take a look at this and trying to figure out, right, where those things are.
Some way of understanding class size.
Well, that's what I was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I was wondering about, where certain information is included, because a parent looking at this maybe building capacity isn't the right number because they're looking at their odds of like, if they wanted to open a role, we know that building capacity is different than program capacity and historical, like so later on I was thinking like 3-year trends of opportunity, like 3-year trends of numbers of folks trying to open and enroll into a school and what the odds are of having a seat. But maybe that's a different place. Maybe it's the same place. That's kind of where those questions of mine, my first question was really coming into play. And there is a difference between program capacity and like physical capacity. And when we get into the rounds discussion that we're talking about before and not wanting to push rounds over. So I think some thinking on that question is important. And Rob, other Rob.
This came up at our long-range advisory committee meeting last night. And how do we bring in the condition of our facilities? How do we bring in capacity? Some of those other metrics that are in the long-range advisory metrics as guiding principles. So we need to, that is not included. That just came up last night. So we need to think about how do we track that also and build that in as it's part of the decision-making in the future. So.
Okay, so I just have one more example of this dashboard. So here I have pulled up a different school. I just thought it was interesting to show a couple contrasting examples. So this is now Lafayette Elementary. So, you know, what jumped out to me was that percentage of students in the attendance area attending their own neighborhood school. But then as you drill down and look at where are students from that attendance area going, we've got a charter school, we've got a focus school that are both big draws as well. So just how different the situation can look from school to school, I think it's going to be a great tool to be able to toggle between and really think about that. Okay, so this next couple of dashboards, this is brand new. This is a proposed kind of a current, more of a current metric to monitor during the school year. So rather than looking at October count, this is looking at monthly enrollment records. So this is straight from our enrollment system. We're playing around with the name, but the monthly enrollment gain loss concept. What this captures is the numbers of students who are leaving and entering the district during the course of the school year. So it's no longer year over year. It's no longer that snapshot look, but this is very like the fluid movement within the school year. We're looking at this monthly. You'll notice September through May. It was noted earlier that August is still a time where the wait lists are being cleared. There's lots of change and fluctuation in the enrollment. There are students who maybe enrolled and did not show up. Their plans changed. So August is very hard to pin down. So that's why here we're including September through May. We're also looking at the start and end statuses on enrollments that that really have to do with choice. So we're taking out some of the statuses, like if a student has an extended illness, if they actually never did show up, like some of those where it's not really based on choice. We're not looking at those in this analysis. Let's see, these are constantly being updated. So what I'm showing along the top on this slide in particular, this is looking back at the 23-24 data just to get an idea of what this could look like during the year. So the blue shows those students entering the district month by month. The orange is captures the exits. And then below that, we have a net line, which also includes a comparison with the previous 3-year average. So again, we're always trying to have that comparison point so we're not making conclusions if it's maybe just a 1-year blip. We really want to have something to anchor ourselves to. So what we can start to see here, there's definitely some trends around timing. So looking beginning of the year and mid-year as those times when there's a lot of movement and change. The other thing that we want to offer in this dashboard is, oh, sorry, let me just make sure. Okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the other thing I'm just going to preview here is a very quick snapshot of this data up through, I believe, September 6th was when we pulled this. And yes, there's not much to report yet, but the intention would be that we could look at this throughout the year to get that kind of current snapshot concept.
This one made me giddy. I really like this data, and coming from my work life in the charter school arena, this is really useful data to look at for specific schools, especially to see sort of like the fear of charter opponents is, oh, they're inflating October count, and then they cancel all the kids out. It's also really good to break this down by student subgroup. So, I mean, when I see the December, January thing, there's a lot of, okay, well, if this is later grades, then that's when semesters change. But that's also when immigrants from outside the country go home for extended Christmas and come back later and re-enroll. So it used to be, at least in the patterns in Denver, was a ton of out to go home in December and then to come back later in the year. And so people came back in slowly over time from extended breaks. And so the schools would do a ton to try to convince families not to take an extended Christmas break back home. So I think this is a really rich data set, and I'm really curious the degree to which it scales down to like the school level and to the subpopulation level, because I think you could see stuff there. In particular, in the charter space, it's one of the questions that comes up is like, do you see students with disabilities coming in and exiting, and what's the pattern? And then the really curious one is to see the transition from one year to the next, and what's the matriculation rate? Are people staying? Because families that are dissatisfied with the school are likely going to make a summer switch. So it's really good to see the overlap from one year to the next by the cohort. But I really like this view, and I think it's super valuable.
I like this view as well, and it's interesting because I was looking at it as like my kids are in elementary school, they come back to school after winter break and be like, we have 4 new kids in my classroom. So I was reading this information as confirmed new students, like I'm submitting my enrollment change, not I'm taking an extended break and coming back, but I am unenrolling officially, or I am enrolling officially. So I am actually now wondering what this data shows. Is it like number of people, is it attendance and potentially taking extended breaks, or is it like official enrollment and unenrollment from BVSD?
The other interesting thing to think about is the influx of newcomers that we saw last year. And I think that, you know, when you look at DPS's data, that's certainly an uptick. When you look at our data, it feels like it was an uptick there. So the bones of the report are good to the extent that you could dial that down to school and subgroup. The data is there, right? We would just have to create those abilities to do that.
And I'm pausing thoughtfully for a moment because I do wish Mike was here to confirm, but I do believe it's official start and end to the enrollment. I pause because I'm not completely sure how an extended break would be handled for our students in our system. But I know this data is looking at official starts and ends.
Because we do have a lot of students that would go to maybe online in extenuating circumstances, and not every school district has online programming like we do, you know, Boulder Universal.
But they wouldn't be officially unenrolled. They'd just be moved to online.
I just want to make sure I understand the line graph is the net change that's depicted in the blue and red. Is that the dark black line? And then the 3-year average is the gray line? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
That wasn't obvious to me anyway.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I want to show next is taking this data, and now we are looking at this as a historical trend. So now, if you look along the bottom, each bar is actually now a school year. And then along the top, those years are bucketed month by month. So again, we're still looking September through May, but in each bucket, we can do a year-to-year comparison. And so you'll notice for September, I have the small preliminary data point that we have so far for this year, but all the other month buckets, we don't have anything yet for this school year. What I mostly wanted to show here, again, it's just another drill down of this data, but additionally, when you're able to interact with this report, online, there will be this ability to hover and actually see the breakdown of those exit codes. I thought this was an interesting example. So last December, we saw 182 students out. Now, a lot of that was going to a school in a different district, but we also saw some moves out of state and country. Then if we looked to January, we can see, okay, so following that dip in December, we got 304 students newly enrolled in January. Again, most of these were coming from a different district, but look at that number of students coming from a different country. So I think that speaks to some of the things that we're perceiving and being able to see that in the numbers.
So I really like these drill downs because I was looking at this data saying, okay, this is nice, but what are we going to do with it? And what are we hoping to infer from it? To me, the drill down is where the power is in this information. The information alone is like, that's nice, but really understanding those patterns of where people are, when people leave us, why and where, and when people are coming to us from where that sheds a very different lens that feels like we can think very differently about and impact in different ways. So thank you for those. Alex?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I would add, this is another place where it would be great to figure out if we can include in our data gathering system the ability to identify the transfer to where they're going, which type of private school they might be going to or coming from. And I realize we may not report that, but it would be really helpful to figure out programmatically what's going on. And then I do want to sort of break that out. And I'm really curious what's going on with our kids with IEPs and are gifted and talented, and are they disproportionately represented in these groups? And this is what gets to my request to sort of connect it to the MTSS data. And so can we find out students that would have been in different tiers of our MTSS system that are more likely to be amongst these different groups of students coming and going? And that's where we could have the feedback loop to the systems and say, hey, it looks like our acceleration of the gifted kids is not hitting the mark, and they're disproportionately the leavers. Or it looks like kids with actual IEPs are coming back to us because they really need the services, and ours are so much better than they get in the private school, so they're coming back. We should promote that more in our communication about the district. So I think there's meaty data there on it. The other one I'm really curious about, and maybe the ends are too small on this, but this goes back earlier. I'm really curious to know about the 16 to 21-year-olds who are not enrolled in school, and whether we have dropout data, unengaged youth, but kids that we could potentially be serving in an alternative education campus or a recovery program that we could get funded for that are in the community. And I think that could come from the survey data, but it could also come here and see, like, when do we get the disengaged youth back through the system and through what portals and services? So again, with Nicole, the ability to drill down, do the subgroups, and I realize we'll have to aggregate because we'll start dealing with small n's, at the school level pretty fast. And so we'll know the kid that showed up in February was X student type. So, but as the board and internally, it's probably helpful to have the really fine-grained stuff to think about who we're losing and who we're gaining.
Just to make sure we know moving forward, but Claire showed the slide earlier by program and the change over year from October count. Does that answer your question though on if we're seeing kids leaving, or?
I'm interested in knowing that sort of by student subpopulation and identification issues, and particularly just from the anecdotal discussion with like the neurodiverse parents who explain that by the time they're 3 years into this, they're trying to enroll in a small private school just because they've had issues. And they may have an IEP, they may have a 504, they may have a trans kid. And, there's so many different variables going into those decision making. But those are students who we could figure out how to serve. We probably have more resources than the private schools for it, other than small class size. But at the same time, parents are frustrated and leaving. So like the anecdotal story we get is of someone who took too long to get the IEP, and so they enrolled in Hillside, or they had an IEP and a 504 plan and it wasn't working, so they went to McIntosh. So it's like the more we can drill down, the more we might identify whether that's true or not, or whether actually we're getting them all back in the 6th grade because they know they need the IEP services and they want back as soon as they can. And then we can adjust accordingly.
I think the next slide gets to some of this, but maybe not to the level that you're speaking to, but it would at least identify a trend to see where we could drill down a little bit, so.
Yeah, so the next couple slides, we'll get more to that program question because I feel like internally we've been mulling over these same questions too. And just going back to, I think it comes down, we need to kind of triangulate across different data sources as well. It's hard to, as we look, it's hard to get the answer from just one place. And so that's why we're really saying like, here's all these sources we need to look at together. So this next chart is now taking a similar concept of those gains, losses. For looking at groups, we now made this cumulative. So it's no longer a month by month just because the numbers get very tiny. So again, as an example, I'm showing last year's data. Another point here where timing comes in. So in this case, the student program groups were determined by if a student was identified into that group at any point during the year. That's a difference with October count. So October, we just get a snapshot of who's been identified, for example, for special education by count day. This is a little bit different. This is inclusive of whether that status was updated at any time in the year. So a little bit different slices. And I just want to point out again, we are looking at smaller numbers here. This is, again, only the mid-year entries and exits. I have another slide to show that's more of the year over year. So that can also be a point of confusion, I think, as well, or just need to think about like these are two different data sources we're looking at. So let me talk it through. So this is flipped or rotated, I should say, from what we were just looking at. But again, our blues are the positives, who's coming into the district. The oranges are who's leaving at some point in mid-year. Each row here represents a specific group of students. Now, notice by the colorful bars, there is a little vertical gray. That's our previous 3-year average. So that's our comparison point to give us some context of last year, did we see those changes exceeding or coming in lower than the last 3-year trend? And additionally, packing in a lot of information here, there's 2 columns next to each student group name that has the net numbers. Again, the darker gray is that last year's net number. The lighter gray net number is the previous 3-year average. Kitty.
So I noticed the category ELL, and on all the other charts we had EB. And is there a difference other than we changed the language?
There is not, and I just need to update my label. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, because I
pointing that
thought,
out. Thank you.
do I need to know this? Okay.
Claire, I really like this view because it gets again to a lot of some of the questions that were asked earlier is which students are leaving us and how is this different from year over year? So like this, I look at this and I say, well, this year we're this time slice, right? We're losing, people are leaving us less than they have on average for the past 3 years. And we're getting more students than we have. So I think that comparison point is really important. I like looking at student groups and to see where this year lies in comparison to a 3-year average for each of those groups. I think this is a really powerful slice of the data for the district and the board to consider as we're thinking through a lot of the questions that came up earlier today. So I appreciate this view.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Nicole. And I would add, again, the ends will get small and the aggregate needs to be there. But I think this is a view of comparison of regions or grades or schools that would be really powerful for us programmatically. And again, I think it shows it's like, yep, we are getting kids back and we're doing better at keeping some than others. And I think it's really powerful.
Okay. Oh, and this one that looks almost empty, again, this is just our quick snapshot of where are we at the very beginning of September. So just to show, I think we'd look at this over time, but not much change yet, right? Okay. So this next chart is now now kind of talking about that triangulation piece. So this is shifting back to a historical look. Now this is going back to October count and looking at that year over year difference for those same groups of students. Let's see. So these are K-12 enrollment counts, historical snapshots. And there's just some interesting stories when we start to dig into this.
This view is not my favorite. I wonder if there is a different way to represent this data. I think I look at this and I think people could infer different things from it because it's not entirely clear what it's trying to say and what the color coding necessarily is indicating. So I wonder if there is a different way to show this information. Dr. Anderson?
Yes, there is. Back to the drawing board.
Yeah, it made me ponder for a while as well. I guess the other thing is to know that these are net total differences by group in number and not by percent. So like this could be an artifact of, like free and reduced lunch could be an artifact of the child family tax credit and then the end of the child family tax credit. Or the Marshall Fire, or, yeah, everything. So one of those things for me gets at, as you think about additional cuts about how to show it, and maybe, multiple lines over time are a good way to do this one. But I think whenever I see the numbers, I also like, okay, I want to know what the relative percent of the population of that is. But again, it gets too complicated pretty fast. But I like, once I spend 15 minutes thinking about it, I'm like, ooh, that's super interesting.
And again, making it clear, because to the point you made earlier, October count is very different than other types of counts. And I know it says at the very bottom of this, but when we're jumping between views, and I know this is a presentation, it's not how it's going to be as folks are interacting with it regularly, but being clear about this is one slice in time. It's not a year change. So how are we laying out and presenting that information to the board, to the public, wherever this stuff is housed, that we're, October count data is one thing, and then our, year-end numbers or change over time are different. So some tinkering on this one would be much appreciated.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. All right, so for the next couple slides, I am going to pass it over to Bill.
I will also say I like the color heading change to another way to indicate future prospective data versus historical data versus, I think that's helpful visual cue.
Okay, so there was a robust discussion about 20 slides ago about open enrollment. So we'll see how many of the questions were answered with some of this and also opportunities where we can dig in further. So just to frame this a little bit, this is registrations resulting from OE, like the title. So this is not total open enrollment applications or selections. This is just a registration resulting from it. So if somebody put in an open enrollment selection, but did not get a choice or did not select a school, they are not included in this. So just sort of to also frame it, open enrollment is more of a leading indicator versus a lagging indicator from the historical information that we're looking at. So this is the current year's activity, which we haven't got into October count yet. So the open enrollment for 24-25, which we did from November of last year through January, and then all the selections. So these are all activities that happened months ago up until the close of open enrollment in August. So again, just to think about the different data set that this is more of a, selections that folks are making for the next year. This also is a result of the School Mint open enrollment and enrollment platform. that is now 2 years old. We've gone through 2 cycles of it. We'll start our 3rd here in a couple of months. Different data collection and selection that existed previously from the custom system that was built into Infinite Campus, which Infinite Campus stopped supporting. So getting more historical information is more challenging because it doesn't quite line up with some of the sort of data fields. And also it's all encompassed in the new product. So I think the interesting thing, and again, these sort of bits of information have showed up in different places. The open enrollment matrix, which would be a total school population of students that are either resident or non-resident within the catchment area or not. This is just the students that participate in this particular year for the next school year. So it's not the total pool of students that are within the district that have open enrolled. Just a reminder of that. It's only the students that have gone through that for that particular year. So I think the most interesting piece here, and is a reference to some of the conversations, the bottom right-hand corner there, where 93 and 92% of the students are getting their first choice of school. So that is definitely different. If we think back, say, 20 years, where open enrollment, some of the preferences and processes and just the fact that we do open enrollment the way we do it, which is kind of unique compared to other districts. Getting your choice of school was very different 20 years ago than where it is now because of the available capacity.
Kitty.
Yes, what does the moved and remain data mean? And then I just want to say, I'm thinking of this as like, what would an ordinary parent want to see? Because we're seeing stuff that would make most people's eyes turn in the back of their heads. I love this piece on the right, knowing how likely am I to get what I want.
Yep. So the moved and remain is, I have a house in Boulder and it's a small house, and my student is going to Foothill, and I move to Firestone to get a bigger house, and I go through the open enrollment process to stay in Fireside or whatever school it might be.
Okay, so folks who moved out of the district but kept their kids in the district
Or
through open enrollment.
not necessarily out of the district.
Oh.
It could be within the district,
Okay.
from Boulder to Louisville, Lafayette, whatever, and wanting to remain in their school, which I think is
Got it.
a piece of the conversations that we've been having about level of choice or preference, rather.
So this is interesting to know. Taking it out of context of the total number of applications. So this is just folks that have registered and are with us now, not the total number of people that participated in open enrollment. And so that the context of having the total participation and then the percentage of folks that those numbers relate to is an important piece that I think is missing. I also think, like knowing how, and then breaking that down by choice level, the percentage of folks that registered and got a seat at their first choice is important. And I like how you included moved and remained, but there are a lot of different selection points. There's more than just that one open enrollment preference. And so I'd be curious also to see the information on those as well. So how many, and this gets to what I was asking earlier on the dashboards. If I'm a parent and I want to know, like I'm going to rank, and some schools say this very clearly at their back to school nights. If you rank us as first choice, you're in the past 5 years, you're guaranteed as a spot in. Or another school will say 65% of the people that apply typically get a seat. So that's some of the information that I think is important for us to understand and for parents to understand. And when we're just looking at the number of folks that got the spot that they wanted, we're missing some of those questions that folks have around with when they Cora and when they're at back to school nights and that kind of stuff. So I would like some deeper digs, some more holistic, looking at the participation in open enrollment, not just the students we get or where the students end up in that process in this section of slides. Kitty, Jason, and I think Alex, I thought.
So that leads me to ask the question is, I did not know that this didn't include everybody who participated in open enrollment. How, looking at this slide, would one know that it does not include folks who just said, forget it, I didn't get what I wanted?
It's just focused on the registrations, which means that, you know, like, so to Nicole's point, there's a whole, you know, how many people get their first choice and don't take it? Like I think that there's a lot of analytical data you can get if you broaden what you're looking at just besides registrations. But this would be based on open enrollment. This is how many people registered, and this is how many out-of-district students registered after getting either their first, second, or third choice preference.
So I'm just thinking, following up on that as somebody, if, you know, for what we want the public to see, they probably won't notice that and make that distinction in this presentation.
And that creates confusion or misconstruing the information that's being presented. So thank you for clarifying that, Kitty, Jason, and then Alex.
And add, if we're going to keep this view, I think you mentioned it, Bill, when you talked, but just putting percentages by what those bars are, I think you said 90-something%. Yeah, just if we are keeping this view, I would add that just for additional clarity, although it sounds like there are larger concerns.
Yeah, I would add, I think it would be helpful, and again, maybe not all on the same graphic because that gets pretty crowded, but I think it would be helpful to know the number of people who are in that school by attendance in their residence area. So if we got this down to the school level or grade level or region level, it'd be good to know 85% of the enrollment is not through open enrollment. These are people who are just going there by their residence preference. And then when you get to the first, second, third choices, it's good to know the 2894 is out of how many people that had a first choice that didn't get it. So to the point is, what's the percent, and then what's the percent of the people using choice as opposed to those who are just automatically assigned. And then when I like Kitty couldn't figure out the moved and remain totals. I think like that's a group that we should, you know, really revisit in policy and consider whether we need them, whether they should be treated as open enrollment at all, and whether we just say, hey, once you're in a school at the first level, you're entitled to stay there, open enrolled through the rest of the grades, just to make fewer transitions in families' lives. And then the last question for me about this, when I think about open enrollment and its impact, is to understand how much of this is the first grade of a school, and then how much enrollment there is in the later grades. Because once the schools fill up in the first year, then very few families leave, and you're only dealing with the marginal exit of there being any enrollment into the school. At least that's what happened when schools are crowded. So now, are we having open enrollment into schools in their second through fourth or fifth year of their services? Because I know in the charter school world, they tend to fill up, and if you're not into the kindergarten of a K through 5, your chance of getting in any other grade goes from 80 to 5%. So I would like to connect this to the grade level offerings in terms of the choice, because otherwise people know not to apply in the second through fifth year of a school because the numbers are probably much lower. This kind of stuff Nicole's talking to in the Cora request where you get the info, but that's the things that comes to mind from me from trying to manage choice in the charter space.
Jeff, Rob Price, Rob Anderson.
So just something that came up at the LRAC meeting last night in the reminders, some of these data that's just brought up look very different if you include the charter schools or if you just include the other schools. And there was actually some confusion last night on some of these figures about which schools were in which pot. So it just needs to be very, very clear what that is. And in some cases, I think having that distinction available will be quite informative too.
I was doing a time check. We got 9 slides left and about 25 minutes. So if we could save 5 minutes for the end, just to have a discussion about next steps, that would be helpful.
It's a subtle reminder. We forgot to name a timekeeper. Thank you, Rob. Board members, for this view, are you thinking that this is best served as the parent as the audience or the board as the audience? Because I've heard a couple things saying this could be useful for parents. is there a parent, do we go back and work on a parent view and a board level view? With the board level view, maybe getting a little bit more nuance and the parent level view being more useful. Like I'd love to have maybe just a couple minute conversation on that so I can give the team direction.
So there's to think that there's when you're in the open enrollment process, right? January, when it closes through August, when we only do administrative transfers, the wait list view, where am I on the wait list, that is available to parents within School Mint. So they know what's going on. We have the ability to add how many seats are we opening at a school, just because like the kindergarten got a new set of seats, right? So, versus third grade, which has 0 because it's charter school or whatever. So when you're in the process is a lot different than looking back at what happened last year, the year before. And the percent chances of getting in somewhere, I think, like in my view, is a bit of a fallacy that it would hold true at any point in time, because what are your preferences that you have? How many seats are open? How many aren't? Like there are so many variables that to say, I've got an 80% chance to get in might be not valid at all. And so, but to say there are 30 seats open because it's kindergarten and there are 29 people that have applied, so you're getting in, or there's 60, so you have a half a chance, whatever.
I think those questions really come into play with our charter schools and our choice schools, where typically enrollment is at capacity. It's not at necessarily our neighborhood schools. The Coras will bear that out. Predominantly High Peaks, Summit, people want to know, because it does then impact for some folks how they're going to rank a school if they feel like the odds are slim to none. And knowing your position on a wait list is only helpful after you've already submitted and are in the process. It's not tackling those questions that we get outside of the actual open enrollment window when they have those views. And so I think there is utility for parents. I think, when I used to do these RFIs, and we can go back and look at all of them, what I was wondering, and it was before the Magellan survey, was where are student families wanting to go and what might that indicate? Like if we know we get a whole bunch of people applying to these certain schools and we have historical wait lists, what's a question we can be asking there? And then if we see a whole bunch of people choicing out of particular schools, what are the questions we can ask there? So I think the information that a district and the board might need and a parent might need, to Dr. Anderson, your question, I think they are different. And I think the utility of, how often we need to see that. And now that if we do surveys, maybe doing those kind of postmortems and understanding where people are trying to go and where maybe not as important if we are surveying and collecting data in different ways. But for a long time, that was just a look at piece of information from the board. So I think there is utility in having both views. And the more we can, to the end, the user experience for the open enrollment process has not typically been very positive for anybody for a long time. And how can we have help inform folks and parents to make that user experience better? I think some of this data can help with that. When there is a high degree, it feels like a Pandora's box, and there's a high degree of uncertainty. If we can share some of this information, it helps parents understand that a little bit better. Kitty, Rob.
Well, I've been thinking about what Rob mentioned throughout this whole presentation of what would the public want to see, what would parents want to see versus what do people, who are really interested in analyzing data want to see. And they're going to be two different things. And I think we need to determine, and perhaps by just asking parents who are not on DAC or not on the board, who aren't already doing deep dives, what information would be useful to you, and present that in the simplest, cleanest way possible, and with the ability to click through for anybody who wants to take a deeper dive and get more into the analysis of it, so that anybody who wants deep or granular information could get it easily, but people who don't care about that won't get distracted by it.
If we think about how this process has evolved, open enrollment and school choice, and in our district. It has been very mysterious, right? To, now we have something called School Mint that gives us data that we can collect. And now we have the showcase, which is you just got to come one night and you can see what all of our schools offer. And then we're going to do a better job this year of the other nights at schools, trying to create some consistency in what folks report out on. I think Robin and her team have done a good job in really working with schools to say, these are the things you should be talking about. So it's more of an apples to apples comparison. So I'm really thinking about like the next of, as we evolve, right, a suite of decision-making tools for families, right, that won't make any promises we can't keep, right? Like if you do this, this is what's going to happen. But it can share some of that historical data. I mean, these decisions for some families have to be agonizing. Right. In my experience in K-12, there's nothing that parents care more about than their kids and their success and future, above and over anything else. And it's why folks go to the nth degree to do order requests and do these things. And so, like I hear you all loud and clear in the sense that we need to have a set of decision-making tools for parents. That's a public-facing piece that makes sense of the information that we have, but does not overpromise or lead people to believe something that it will happen that might not. Right? To Bill's point, I think that can be really risky to say, if you wouldn't have shown me this, then I wouldn't have done this. And so then you need to give me this. And like, once you run the lottery, it's done. Like, you can't rerun a lottery. Like once you run a lottery, and we do the lottery through the School Mint system, which is tried and true tool. Here's what I'm taking away from this conversation. We should be working to develop a suite of decision-making tools that make the user experience for our parents and community members better. And we need to think about the analytical tools we need as a governance team to think about how your policies, right, and our practices distribute students across our district and from inside and outside of the district. And then thinking about that, thinking about the opportunity to add new programs and the opportunity that we'll have in the spring to rethink about our attendance boundaries. All of that information from an analytical perspective to help us make wise choices on behalf of our community, but also this idea of, what do we give to parents? How does it help them? How does that help them through what has to be an exciting yet very difficult time?
Okay, I will hustle through some of these next ones. Just the one
Bill.
last thing.
Sorry.
Oh, what? Sorry.
Just a real quick addition. I really appreciate that perspective. It comes down to, what question are we trying to answer, right, for parents, and how can we make it easier for them? And I just want to make a little push to the degree that we can, the labels, the explanations, the translation of all the shorthands, because we assume a lot of knowledge here and we use a lot of shorthands and acronyms and stuff. And for parents, that's brutal. And not knowing what the comparisons mean or what is on these table headings. So to the degree that we can, right, as much as possible, even if it seems like a lot, but I think it's going to be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so the one last data point on this. So in the bottom right, the first choice, second choice, third choice. Last year, 100 of those 179 students, and this year 149 of the 221, which is 56% and 67% respectively, were on the charter wait list as their first choice. So the vast majority of the second choice options which is where most of our wait lists are, except for like 3 or 4 schools that are not charters. Like most of the wait lists are at the charter schools. Okay. This just shows out of district registration. So there's a subset of out of district registrations ranked by number per school in decreasing order. This goes down to N of 1. So it kind of runs out, but it wouldn't fit on the chart. But just to note that the top 3, right, that's Broomfield. Then we have our online school, Boulder Universal, then 3 high schools, And then, you can kind of read it down from there. But I think there's a few things to think about here. And back to one of the maps that Glenn had, what are the commuting patterns? What are the border areas? Broomfield is definitely very unique in all of this because it's a city that's split by 5 school districts. So, you can live across the street from Broomfield High and want to go to Broomfield High. And then also the charter schools are a factor within that. Next, so I think this was some of the question that you had, Alex, about what numbers are happening at each grade level, and certainly those transition grades are the majority. So the top line in green is the total for the 3 below: neighborhood, focus, and charter. And this is registrations. Again, we can change that data set, but this is just the registrations by OE. And focus schools and charter schools are all OE. So those are going to be a little unique. We know that most of our open enrollment is between neighborhood schools from some of our previous slides. And interesting, like at the high school charter level, so that's peak to peak. And so, not taking any students in those upper grades for a variety of reasons. And so it really does show the pattern of, the first year of a transition school, maybe the second year, kindergarten, first grade, you stay in the kindergarten, the private preschool version, and then come in first grade, maybe. So those patterns start to show up, but then as you get through the grade, it drops off fairly significantly. Then the next one. Oh.
I don't understand in the high school level, for example, seems like the end's way too low. So what, or is it just because you're just dealing with peak to peak? So the kids coming from 8th grade to 9th grade aren't included in this. I guess that would illustrate to me how it would be useful in almost all these graphics to know what's the total enrollment in that group next to the percent that are OEing in. So we could see that you're really talking about, the percentage of 1% of the students at peak to peak, rather than feeling like that's the 9th grade enrollment in charters is 100% picked. And I guess the other point for me in terms of a policy implication that pops right out of it is whether or not we are allowing peak to peak, for example, not to backfill when students leave. So if they have 0 students coming in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, that's probably a policy decision not to allow new kids to come in, even though they may very well have slots, which is one of the sort of equity implications of charter management.
This slide, I feel like I have way more questions than what I can draw from this slide. Not the withdrawal code one, but the previous slide. So the utility of this information at this level, I guess I'm not really, it speaks to that we do see at starting points of schools, we get more open enrollment registrations. Again, not the total number, can kind of see where they are, but what are we going to do differently? Yeah.
I mean, I could see a report where if you were to get this to the school level, the percentage of, right, the percentage of kindergartens who applied, who got their choice, the first grade, second grade, like, so you could tell a story, which is, even if you don't get in kindergarten, right, if you get in first, you have a really great shot of getting in first grade historically, or, so we have some work to do. I think that some of the things that you all shared with the last slide is similar to or 2 slides ago is similar to this slide. And how do we make this interactive and user-friendly for parents? And then how do we boil this information down to the board that could help inform policy?
Well, and that to the policy points, like, are some of these in our charter and our focus schools is because a kindergartner entered the system and got a spot in a kindergartner, but they had an upper level sibling that never got in their first round, but now they can apply under a like, I'm wondering what factors contribute to some of these. So that's where my more questions about our open enrollment process and the people that are actually moving and so at the school level, I think it would help in a different way, but as we're looking at policy, I have a lot of wonderings about, you know, what these numbers indicate.
Yeah, like for me, part of it gets to the earlier question of that you were bringing up about like, what's my chance actually of applying here for the strategy of people experiencing open enrollment? And I think this sort of reflects if you don't get into the first year of a school, your chances of getting in go way down. And so then that would be reflected, the parents would know that, and they wouldn't try to open enroll and list something as a first choice for first or second grade. And it gets back to the points of people transitioning between schools when they're dissatisfied mid-level. If they feel like they don't have open enrollment options in the later grades because they can't get in through that, then we have to adjust it through other systems, like letting them stay there when their family moves or the people trying to get back in. So I think there's policy implications and I think there are choice implications, but it would be more useful to know how do these numbers relate to the total enrollment? How many people are staying and are there by residence? So like we get a sense of the incremental opportunity for choice to affect the enrollment. And that's useful for us for design and for parents to know the strategy they want if they're trying to get into a school.
I agree with the points that were just made. And I think the tricky part is that I want to get to that story that Rob was talking about. And as complex as this is, it doesn't allow you to do that because there's so much information missing. And so I'm concerned about, well, what do we make available to parents that might be useful for them? Because I'm not sure that tells a story that we think we're telling with it right now. And it doesn't also let us do the stuff that we need to do for policy. So it's almost in between. So I think maybe figuring out what's missing to flush it out to make it useful for parents, and then what can we do for it to deeper dive separately.
Need a question? I guess the other question I have, especially for high school, is we don't capture the alternative education campuses anywhere in this. And it'd be good to know, I'm curious about the students that we might be losing from the system or into the system and the choicing that's going on there.
Okay, there is more. So this is jumping back to early on, we identified that we wanted to look at a withdrawal code type of report. So this is going back to that data set of those September through May cumulative, this time focusing on the exit codes of students. This is called a bump chart. What it is showing us, so there's 3 columns of dots. Those are year by year. You can see that labeled at the bottom. And then our y-axis here is a rank. So the number 1 rank at the top, that tells us in each of those years, the through year exits of students, the number 1 ranking reason was a transfer to a different school district in Colorado. Down from that, transferring to a school located in a different state, and we can kind of go down that way. So I think the interesting story here is looking at how do those exit codes stack up? What's coming up more often than others? How has that changed over time? And then I've put a little bit of annotation on the right side just to think about this in terms of what is in our sphere of control and what isn't. So that top reason probably is a little bit of both, kind of depending on where did those students leave to. Did they go to a close by district? Does that indicate kind of a choice? Or was it a move down to Durango that is more of a change in family situation?
So we did a couple of surveys. This first one is on the intent to return. So we asked families last spring if you're intending to return to your school. So this was a very small subset, 73 responses out of the 13,000 responses that we got of why they were not returning. So consistent with some of the other conversations that we've had, some of the other surveys that have been done. It wasn't a mandatory required survey response. I think a 0.6% response rate. I think I'd let Jonathan weigh in on whether that's valid data or not, but it's at least some identification of why folks said they weren't going to return. And then also on the open enrollment process, when they were offered and accepted a seat, there was a survey that also wasn't required. Whoop, did it not advance? Oh, there we go. So 300-ish responses out of the 3,000 total open enrollment process for this current year. Why they pursued choice. And so the host of reasons that we have been talking about, or opportunities, and, you know, where are there opportunities to market things or communicate better? And so, you know, 10%-ish response rate, is that good or bad, or enough data to make a decision on? But at least it's some response that will continue forward in our open enrollment process is collecting this information from folks if they choose to respond.
I'm glad we're asking those questions, but with a response rate that low, it's really hard to make draw meaningful conclusions from it. So I would encourage us to continue to ask those questions, but be very careful about reporting it when participation rate is so low.
I'm looking at the one in the withdrawal code. That is actually, that's a different survey. I mean, that's obviously based on withdrawals. So that's a pretty accurate number of.
100%. Yeah. When people leave and they tell us, you know, what the reason is.
And then just a small percentage of these people are the ones that, okay, got it.
Just one other question I have. If the survey response rates are so low that interpretation is probably not a great idea, I'm curious to know what, and maybe this is a Robin question, like what's the reality of a principal being able to do exit sort of conversations with families and have, you know, we'd have much higher response rate if you're in an elementary school and you know you lost 20 kids and you talk to 15 of the parents and, you know, ask them why they're leaving. Might be a much better data collection strategy than the survey stuff we're seeing. Is that realistic? Is that an option for a small elementary?
I'll answer that. I'd want to look at other options before asking principals to add that onto their plate. You know, and just in speaking with principals, we had Principal Advisory Council a couple of weeks ago. We're asking them to take on a lot of new and different strategies and responsibilities in line with our strategic plan. I'm wondering if that was an important like a follow-up phone, like you might be able to get somebody to do a follow-up phone call or do a phone survey or something along those lines. That would have to be a last resort, I think, just based on the workload that I'm seeing and we're trying to manage right now, given that we're so lean within many of our schools administration, especially those small elementary schools. They're covering classes, doing bus duty, you name it.
Just real quick on this. These two surveys came out of the Long Range Advisory Committee process, so they're new to this system. And think about the amount of surveying that we've done this year of our families. So we might be over surveying a little bit. Just keep that in mind as we move forward. But these are new. I would expect the participation will get better as we move forward in future years.
We can always make them required so they can't move forward through the process until they answer it.
And the skewing of the results would follow, right?
I have 3 more slides. Are we good we'll just power through? All right, I'll do these very quickly because the last couple slides is just about private school and homeschool data. So the same heavy caveats apply that Glenn spoke to earlier. This is, again, just showing the first slide of the private school data. And just to show you, there is more information. And this is when we get down to the really small numbers. Again, we're trying to fill in this picture a little bit more, so I think TBD, more to come on this data set. And then finally, this is just another look at that homeschool number. I included here at the top, we're looking at BVSD patterns. The bottom is looking at a state comparison. These are, I apologize, I've labeled them percentages. They're really more of a ratio. So what I've done is compared the number of reported homeschool counts in the CDE data set to our total pupil count, either at the district or the state. So it's not a subset of students, but it's a comparison. And just, I wanted to show here that the pattern is very similar that we see in our district compared to the state overall.
I thought the state comparison on this one is very helpful, more helpful than just looking at our numbers overall.
All right, Dr. Anderson, you got the next few slides. You were Kathleen.
I sure am. If you could forward to the next slide. So board members, as we enter this open enrollment season, staff is proposing a policy change to add a preference as part of the regulation JECCR for individuals who work within the boundaries of the Boulder Valley School District. So we know that in Boulder alone, we have more than 70,000 individuals who commute here to work each and every day. And we feel like that as they're coming into that district, it's an opportunity, given the fact that we do have room for them to bring their students with them. And so we would propose this changed language as part of a regulation, and we can bring this forward to the board at our meeting next week. And it would include anybody who resides outside of and works within the boundaries of BVSD, including all of our, including our district and those counties that are listed. We would create a process to verify that the individuals were working for an employer in our boundaries when they apply, and then on the first day of the school year, and that would be consistent with other checks that we do to make sure that folks are that their applications line up with reality. And would add this as a way to really engage our businesses, our local businesses within our school district, into this into the conversation around the value that our schools provide to our business community and to our community at large. And so we will be proposing this change for you all, and happy to have a brief conversation around the thoughts on this. In regards to the preference, this would be a preference that would be after all preferences that include someone who resides within our community and with our school district. So this would be a preference only above folks who are open enrolling outside of the district. It would just make a preference for folks who work here above those who don't work here or live here but want to come to school here.
And something that came up at LRAC last night was a suggestion to also give preferences to grandparents. And I think what they meant is if the grandparent resides in the district, to add that as a preference too.
I just think this sounds logical and wonderful. It's a kind of the next iteration of what we already have. Our policy previously stated that, employees of BVSD get preference, right? This makes a lot of sense. I love it.
I think this makes sense if we're thinking about it sort of holistically. I mean, I'd go back to, I'd still like to make a transition so that one of the reasons people still work in Boulder is those who've left the district. And I, for one, argued before when we were revisiting this policy that the students whose parents leave and move out of the district shouldn't even be in the open enrollment process. So once you're enrolled in one of our schools, we should incentivize keeping them here because we'll then get the funding that comes from an out-of-district enrollment. And if we made that a guaranteed enrollment, then they'd have an incentive to tell us that they moved out of the district, because then we'd start getting money from their district. Whereas in our current policy, they sort of have an incentive to pretend they're living with the one who's still in the district, even if they don't live there. So that's why I advocated before and would like to move forward having those who exit the district residentially be automatically allowed to continue enrolled in the school they're in and through all the grade span at that school. And then thinking of the parents here who might be still working in Boulder while leaving, that sort of reinforces that idea that if someone's working here, they should stay. That said, on its own, this one gives me a little bit of heartburn because in the charter school world nationally, there are a lot of people who've proposed charter schools that are linked to a business or an employer, and you end up with perversions of the demographics of the school. And so you end up reflecting the employees' demographics. And so if you have a really high paying preference or a high paying employer, you have given a preference to a bunch of very well paid people, as opposed to like the people who may be employed out of the district at a housekeeping service or something else that are not making much money, but the business isn't located in the district, but the work is in the district. So I'm really curious to know how we would keep an equity lens on this change to make sure that low-income families, English language learners, and others are equally represented in it without saying, okay, well, all the kids of the engineers and the tech industry get to have an enrollment preference over those who are coming in to clean our houses and work in our hotels. So stuff like that, I'd want to really keep in front of mind.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I think that we were really thoughtful, tried to be thoughtful here in the sense that anybody working in any job anywhere throughout our community, right? And to the extent that regardless of how much, regardless of what the employment might be, I do think that the way that open enrollment works, you have to be very, and the way school choice works, I think you have to be very careful to know and understand that some of the limitations that are around school choice are potentially going to create some inequities, and so you have to pay attention. So I do think that that's something that we can monitor, because this would be a choice, right? To the extent that these folks apply today, right? And we don't know, if that's why they apply because they work here. At a minimum, I think that you'd be able to quantify that with this choice by adding this preference. And to the extent of further conversations around whether or not students who leave have to apply for an open enrollment preference. I mean, I think that conversation doesn't necessarily have to happen simultaneously, but it can be something we talk about at our agenda setting, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks, right? To be able to kind of think about what that would be, because that would be taking somebody from an open enrollment process to just a practice that's like a guaranteed admission type of a practice. I would say time is of the essence if this is something that we want to do. I do think that there is certainly some positive energy around the idea that we would be engaging our businesses and our folks who work in our businesses throughout our community. But with the showcase about a month away, I think that if we're going to do this, that we would need to have some signaling from the board that as this comes forward, that we'd have support so that we could move forward with confidence, and then to begin the other folks, engaging the other folks, chamber and others around this preference as a change to the regulation.
One point, I know the city of Boulder has looked at who's commuting in and for what types of jobs. I don't know if all of our other localities have, and like dental hygienists and those types of jobs that people are coming in to the city of Boulder itself for. When the last time I remember hearing about that, it wasn't those really high paying jobs, because to be able to afford to live here really puts people out. And so I don't know if other localities have. I agree we need to be mindful of equity, but from what I remember of seeing from the city of Boulder information was that folks are in commuting not for the highest of paid jobs. Those ones are living within the city itself, but agree on the equity lens there. And then I saw Lelania had, and then Kitty.
As you know, I do generally agree with this. I wondered if we've thought through a place like Broomfield High School, where you have 271 kids who are maybe coming from right across the street, right? They could be very near. And I don't know if Broomfield has businesses that would draw a bunch of kids, but I wouldn't want to displace somebody geographically that was right by Broomfield High School for somebody who had I think it's a wrinkle in it. I have a little bit of a worry on that particular school.
So I'm generally in favor of this too, but some questions come up for me, such as people who work in the trades, other people who may be self-employed, who might not live in the district, but they work at various places. Like say you're a plumber, or say you are a housekeeper. What percentage of your jobs would need to be within our boundaries to qualify? What if you worked for an agency, for example, a cleaning agency or a nanny agency, and you work, well, nanny, you'd probably work in the same place, but cleaning, you'd clean a bunch of places. So again, is it based on where that agency would be located? Would it be based on where the individuals are actually going to work? I mean, I don't know the answers, but those are things I think we need to think about and figure out.
I think the immediate plan would be to take those on a case-by-case basis, right? If folks have extenuating circumstances. Elenia, to your point around the amount of open enrollment interest that we have in our schools in Broomfield, that this preference could potentially provide preference to folks who work in our community but don't necessarily live closest to those schools, I think is a perspective we would need to consider. Here's the information I don't know of the folks who apply to those schools, how many get in versus how many are waitlisted. And if I can give you that information, that might help clarify the worry around that. I don't know that we could split this out for everybody, but this community, I think it has to be for everybody or for nobody. But what we can do is pull that information, try to get that to you all this week. So when this regulation comes forward to you next week at our board meeting, then you'd have that information to make a decision.
What I do like about this is the way it signals that we are a really great school district. We recognize that folks, not everybody that works here can afford to live here. And we know how meaningful, particularly in the lower grades, even in the upper grades, it can be to be able to get to an after school activity or a midday activity. And if you're commuting long distances, the number of school musicals and plays and things a parent might have to miss because they cannot afford to live here, but really need to work here. I think it signals that, we really care about families. We are a really great school district. We want to make the school experience positive for all of the people that are in our community. And I want to say, the people in our community, the folks that work in our communities help our communities thrive. They might not pay taxes in the same way, but the number in Boulder alone is staggering. The city of Boulder would not be as successful without folks that have to commute in on a daily basis. So those folks aren't taxpayers, but they are part of our community, and tend to signal to them that we care about you and your experience is really positive. And so that's one thing, while not perfect, that I do like about this proposed policy change. Robin and Alex.
Yeah, and I will say, and a lot of communities across our school district are talking about this idea of affordable housing, right? And attracting families to their city and to BVSD. And we can wait for that to work, right? We can wait. And watch the political swirl that happens around a lot of that in a lot of places. Or maybe if families start having their kids come to our schools, it would motivate them to move here. I mean, I think you can think about this in two different ways. And how do we as a school district take a position and a lead within our community to say that we want this to be a family-friendly, family-welcoming community, right? And we have the very best schools, and we have some room, and there's an opportunity. And the best case scenario is you have folks who don't live here who decide, okay, well, I work here, I'm going to start commuting here. And then because they fall in love with our schools, then families, make the choices they need to make to move here. And yes, it's expensive, and it's expensive all along the Front Range. so it is a potentially for us to really make a statement around, this might be an opportunity for us to really help as our cities are trying to figure out and navigate what's really a complicated situation around affordability for families in our community.
Yeah, I'd like to make one observation and then reiterate. I think this is a great idea to explore. My concerns about equity are things to sort of track and figure out how to manage, not a reason not to do it at all. I would add that when I look through all the data we've looked at today, I keep in mind that it looks to me like if 15% of the families are not in our schools and we have 35% choosing at some level, basically about half the families in Boulder are exercising public school or public or private school choice. They're choosing where to go. And so we have to figure out our system in a way that accommodates all that choice. It's like every other family is choosing where they go. And then to put aside a little bit, when we think about this new strategy of preferencing the people who work here, people are deciding where to live based on their expense of living there. And if they are part of the 15% paying for private school from another district and they can come to a great public school in Boulder Valley, then when they move here, they can save the private school expense that they're spending while they live outside the district. And so we just reduced their monthly expense by $2,000 or $3,000, depending on the private school and the kids they've got. So, I mean, I think it's actually a way of eventually making Boulder a more affordable place for them in order to be able to afford to live here. Plus, when we talk about not being able to, have taxes to pay for the people who come from out the district, we actually get funding from the other sending district, and to the extent that we're net winners versus losers, that's revenue to the district that's subsidizing our schools. So I think this is a really good idea. And I think if we design it intentionally around, the full employment spectrum, and it's incrementally on the edges, but it's making Boulder actually in the long run more affordable. It's demonstrating to people on the edges of our district the great advantage of having such a distinguished and exceptional school district with great schools that they want to be at. So I see it as win-win-win that leverages our strengths. So.
Yeah, I'm also supportive, agree with all the points that have been made and the caveats as well. Do we have, we always hear about the number, was it 70,000 people that commute into work? Do we have a sense of the level of interest, for a policy like this, how many people may take advantage of that? I mean, not that we want to, we can't anticipate 70,000 new kids, but any sense of what that might look like?
Not really. And there's limits. Like we'll engage our businesses to help engage employees, right? We'll do some just very brief, once approved, just some very brief advertising for on maybe some of the throughways coming into the city or into our district. And then, but because it'll be a separate preference, we'll be able to know at the end of this, did this make a difference or it didn't make a difference? And, as we try to solve these complicated problems, I think there's times where you have to take some chances and make some moves and see what happens and then adjust. And, if by doing this, there's something that breaks in the system, like we can go back and review that. Or if this can, if we can get 100 students back that are already in our community, right, that are having other choices, and we get 100 new students from outside of our community, and we can, hang on to 100 other students that have been dropping out or moving or leaving us, right? Then you're talking about, if you can do that over time, impacting that trend, right, which is a 7% 5-year trend, as you saw at the beginning, right? And if this past year we're down 300 students from the previous year, right, you can get to a place where maybe you stabilize. So, how realistic is that? I think it's aspirational. I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I can tell you that this is, I think, an idea that has some support from folks that I've spoken with, and to the extent that we have folks who come in on the Flatiron Flyer, right? If you can catch the Flatiron Flyer, you can get to our schools, right? With RTD, or if you're commuting in. The idea that I keep hearing about, and I think I've talked to board members about this, is there a better time you have with your kids than when you're alone in the car with nothing to talk about but what's going to happen that day, and then after the day, how did it go? And I've got 2 kids, and people used to make fun of me because I used to always take these road trips and I'd never fly. And I don't like flying, but there was another reason: is the time that you spend. Right, the kids can't get away from you. You can take their devices, and you can. I think there's an opportunity there.
I didn't want to lose track of Kitty's comment that came out of LRAC. Looking at our data and the demographic shifts, we are growing in our aging population. A lot of those folks are grandparents in our community. So I think it's something also to consider between the aging population, the challenges around getting childcare in our communities, whether that is also a potential market to tap into and say, like, if you have a grandparent here and that grandparent provides before and after child care, and if that might lead to a bus availability and really improve conditions for folks as well, it could be a potential enrollment preference. So I didn't want to lose track of that. I could see the benefit from a lot of different angles. And those folks, to Alex's earlier point, are voters. They do approve bonds. They live in this community. So I want to also hold on to that suggestion in again, creating a child-friendly community and a community that's friendly to all the folks that live here, I think is really important. So worth entertaining that idea as well for a bunch of different aspects.
We don't just have to entertain it, we can do it. To the extent that the board thinks that that is a preference that would be important, the sequencing of that preference, a grandparent preference, or a relative preference versus, you could add that preference and then add this kind of work-based preference next. Again, we have a little bit of time to do something. I would just need some direction, because at this point, we're preparing to move forward this change to the regulation. As a reminder to the board, I share with you what happens in regulations, and then after we set a regulation, 30 days, then it goes into effect. If regulations aren't necessarily voted on like policy, but we could entertain that if the board wanted to have a brief conversation on that.
I would be in favor. I see some thumbs up. And I do think it also, I think there are folks that are taking advantage of that anyway. And so maybe that brings to the surface those people as well. Alex?
This is a piece of feedback throughout our open enrollment consideration, but I think as you do this, I'd also think about it specifically. When we can think about enrollment preferences for employees, I think our universal preschool placement is another key one to partner on. So if we have a large employer that's physically located somewhere, then our local elementary school ought to be one of the ones with a UPK program in it, so that they can make that commute and have the kid back off, and then they'd be interested and they see that the elementary school location works for them. So I would think about UPK a lot, and I would think about it in conjunction with this in terms of program location.
Bridge care, as just as a reminder, we don't get to place kids in the preschools we want them to go to. They have to go through bridge care for the 10 hours. I think that there's merit to that. We would have to figure out, like, how do you not, I don't know where to place now, but that system's evolving. Maybe it does evolve where we could do some of those things, but the bridge care piece, I think, would be the one barrier there.
But I'm thinking about the intentional design of where we locate the programming and say, oh, well, what if we went to this school? We hadn't really thought about it, but it's not a big neighborhood, but it's actually a huge employer location instead, stuff like that.
All right, we've got one slide left, and the comments that I heard today is we need to work on this slide. So how about we address this under separate cover at a later date, after we have a chance to meet and kind of digest what was said today. Is that fair?
Fair to me. Rob, Glenn, Robin, Bill, Claire, thank you so much for all of your work on this. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful session. I appreciate everybody who stayed and watched. And board members, lots of exciting work here. We'll take your suggestions. We'll circle back and figure out the best ways to kind of bring those back. And next week, you'll be getting those new JECC-R recommendations for approval, and we'll move forward. Thanks, everybody, for a great day.
Thanks, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.